All right, trying it again. The Zodiac Files, the #1 show on YouTube. You can see the absolute crack tech team we have here. So I don't hear the echo. Hopefully, all of you guys can find this show same place as before. YouTube.com/PlanetXFilm. Anyway, without further ado, we have Ned Dehan, Blackbox Online Radio. Make sure you guys subscribe to his channel and various channels. We're going to be discussing the Jack the Ripper influence on the Zodiac crimes, as well as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders of the Texarkana Phantom. So, got comments back up. Hopefully you guys are all there. And without further ado, making his return to the channel, the man of the hour, Blackbox Ned Dehan. Welcome back to the channel, sir.
Hello, Ross. Thank you for having me.
All right, I think we're doing better now. We've conquered our technical difficulties, and I'm not sure what's going on with StreamYard. Trust me, guys, we've been through it all as contacting them and resolving this type of things. But without further ado, Ned, let them know where they can find you, all of your links, and where they can support you and such.
All right, well, hello. My name is Ned Dehan, as Ross said in the introduction. I'm the host and creator of Blackbox Online Radio. I'm also known as Blackbox Ned, and I do a segment every Monday about the Zodiac Killer called Zodiac Monday. I do a segment every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday, and I've recently added the Cooper Friday segment to BBOR, talking all about DB Cooper, and I put out bonus episodes talking about various subjects. There are now more than 1,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio, just everything all across the spectrum, and I try to release shorts and reels about 5 days a week. Those don't only come out on YouTube, but also on Facebook. Ned Dehan, that's my name on Facebook. You can watch the shorts and reels over there, as well as BlackboxNed88 over on Instagram. And those mostly focus on various true crime cases. Again, any story is fair game for those. And as far as promoting anything, I just invite you to check out my YouTube channel, Blackbox Online Radio. If you haven't heard it before, if you're curious about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, DB Cooper, and any subject under the sun or in the darkness.
Make sure you support Ned on his Buy Me a Coffee link, and also you have the new audio. Is it the audio readings of your book? I think you've just posted those. Make sure you guys check out those. Like, sub.
Oh, yes. And as Ross said, I do have a page on buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 for donations or contributions to help support the show. But also, I was putting out my fiction on YouTube, releasing things in audiobook format. I am the creator of the White Horse Killer Saga, and those things were coming out on the weekends, and I've completed the third book, and that is now completely available online. The first book was called Killer on a White Horse, the second one was Down the Dark Lane, and the third one was called White Horse Strong. All of those are available on YouTube 100% for free in audiobook format. And if you're curious about murder mysteries, things that have been inspired by true crime cases turned into fiction, feel free to have a listen.
Yep, absolutely. Check those out, guys, and feel free to weigh in the comments. We will, take a look at that once we come to that point. But something that I've heard Ned bring up, which I think definitely deserves some more conversation and investigation here, is, and something that I agree with. I think we're in agreement on this, Ned, is that the Jack the Ripper crimes likely had some sort of influence on the Zodiac. Kind of just a starting point, Ned. I've heard people say, like, oh, I don't think Zodiac was conscious of the Jack the Ripper crimes. That is almost unfathomable, given that it is by far the biggest, unsolved cold case, maybe in world history, or at least from a media, media circuit standpoint. Jack the Ripper kind of, without a doubt, got the most headlines, and especially when people say, I know Ned's aware of my kind of non-canonical, pre-Z crime series. If people think Zodiac knew about Ray Davis and the Swindles and Gaviota Beach, but didn't know about Jack the Ripper, does that even track? Because if he's reading these detective magazines and all this stuff, and I will eventually pass this over to Ned when I get around to it. Could you see that, Ned, where he's only conscious of these kind of local Southern California crimes, and then not as these kind of much bigger, like we said, from a media standpoint, Jack the Ripper and the Moonlight Murders. You know.
I think that that would be highly improbable. I suppose that that is theoretically possible, but very, very unlikely
Right.
that he was not familiar with not only Jack the Ripper, but also the Moonlight Murders.
100%. Yeah, that's and we're gonna kind of get into the granular meat and potatoes of these issues, guys. But this is just kind of a starting point. My big thing with Jack is, I think when I was on Ned's show, we briefly grazed over this, but I'm hoping we can give it a little bit more of a light, is whether or not, I know the big thing that came out later on was that the Dear Boss letter was fabricated by this journalist, and it's not actually Jack himself. From Zodiac's standpoint, I don't feel that matters whether Jack wrote the first letter or any of the Jack letters, because Zodiac wanted to achieve what Jack achieved, which is the mass media hysteria. And he saw that those letters, whether fake or authentic, definitely achieved that, and he seems to replicate it again in the Zodiac crimes, but we can get Ned's take on that.
Well, no matter what anyone thinks about any type of Ripper hoax theory that the killer didn't write those letters or not, the public perception and the widely held belief, even to this day, is that Jack the Ripper wrote those letters. You don't really get into that until you get under the surface. Now, Ross asked a very good question. Is there any possibility that the Zodiac would not have been familiar with Jack the Ripper? Almost certainly not. I remember having conversations about Jack the Ripper back in high school with people who weren't close true crime followers. Very few people were close true crime followers back in those days. And it was mostly about how it's just Jack the Ripper is an extremely well-known story. And even to the point where they're talking about how the details of how there's this serial killer who wrote the taunting letters, how he specifically created and designed these letters to be taunting. And I remember the first conversation I truly had about Jack the Ripper, where someone said, Jack the Ripper maybe didn't want to get caught, but he wanted people to know that he was doing it. He was writing these letters to just share to everyone in England that he was responsible for the crimes. And the person that I was talking to was actually somewhat fascinated with that type of boldness, even though it's a terrible, terrible story about what Jack the Ripper did. So I think that it's very unlikely that the Zodiac killer would not have had familiarity with the world's most famous unsolved murder mystery.
Absolutely. And I mean, I believe we grazed over this when I was on your channel as well, is the whole British influence of Zodiac, Happy Christmas, and again, this is not something confirmed, but it's, it's more of a theory. And if that's the case, if he's reading British literature, a la the ABC murders or whatever, Sherlock Holmes, throw anything out there, right? I would find it, pretty hard to believe that he's going to take all these British influences, yet graze over Jack the Ripper, which, as Ned said, is the biggest unsolved cold case, really, really in world history. So I've been doing some research these past few days, and there was 158 daily newspapers in London at the time, and you can kind of like how Zodiac sends it to 3 different papers to kind of create the, not necessarily the bidding war, but, kind of create the competition between them. I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I've had the opportunity to interview Richard Jones of the Jack the Ripper Tour website, channel, and the actual tour company. And Richard Jones has followed the Jack the Ripper case for 42 years. And one thing that he pointed out at the very beginning of our interview is it appeared that whoever was mailing the Ripper letters knew what they were doing, because they didn't just mail it to a newspaper. As Ross just said, there were numerous newspapers. And to confess, I didn't know that there were 158. I didn't know there were that many. But what Richard Jones pointed out is that the person mailing the Ripper letters sent it to the central news agency, so it wouldn't only get local coverage. This taunting serial killer letter would get national coverage because it would have gone out on the wire. And some people think that, okay, well, the person writing the Ripper letters would have had to have had experience with the newspaper business. they say the same thing about the Zodiac killer. A lot of that stuff exists in theory. Was the Zodiac killer a journalist? Was he a newspaper man?
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, we can talk about that until the cows come home. The fact of the matter is, both of these are unsolved murder mysteries.
Yeah, no, and interestingly enough, as Ned said, they both have, the letter connection, which I think are some of the. I know Ned has covered the Louisiana Axemen, and you had the expert over on your channel, so check that out, guys, as well. So there is a few other kind of earlier cases that involve the letter writing campaign, and then again, even at the end of the Moonlight Murders, Ned, there's those letters sent from somebody that says like basically the wrong. It's not the killer taking credit, but it's basically someone who says they have information that says like, hey, the wrong person the suspect hasn't been caught and they're still out there. So I'm not sure if those were actually made public, Ned, but I think that was something that's sent to law enforcement. But it's super interesting, So and then you do have as Ned just mentioned, you do have the whole theory because of Jack sending it out to the wire. You kind of have that parallel thing in both cases where we hear this all the time in Zodiac, Ned, as you just said. Even people point the finger at Paul Avery, which I think is highly unlikely due to the fact his health issues later in life. I suppose not impossible, but highly unlikely. Plus, him being a public figure, it's kind of easier to track his movements. Paul was here at this event, blah, blah, blah. He was doing that. He was at work. So he's a little bit easier to track than some of the other suspects. But you do get it in both, where Zodiac's a journalist or, because of Graysmith's career. I always, I don't know if we ever discussed this, Ned, but how in Yellow Cover, Graysmith postulates that Zodiac might have been a political cartoonist because he was a political cartoonist. I'm like, dude, like, what are the odds of you writing this book on Zodiac and you think he has the exact same career as you? Hey, I'm not saying it's impossible. Maybe there's a 1% chance, but I did always find that rather unlikely that he would have the exact same career as Graysmith.
Well, Ross, you've had Professor Horn on the channel multiple times, and he is the loudest voice on that. He's pointed the finger directly at Graysmith. For a while, he was saying that Graysmith most likely was an active participant in all of this because of his job at the Chronicle. He would have been in perfect position to fabricate everything. And Thomas Horn even went to the level of accusing Graysmith of being the creator of the ciphers, not writing the text, but the person who actually wrote out the symbols, because he was a cartoonist and extremely good with a pen. No matter what anybody says about Graysmith, I think he was a good illustrator. I mean, you saw his Zodiac illustration. It's the most famous one. He was a good artist. And of course, he had a big career change in life when he started just becoming a frequent true crime writer, which almost every single book he puts out is a blend of fact and fiction. And that's why Drew Beeson likes to use the term graysmithing, splicing together two ideas that don't belong together. And I recently did a book discussion about Robert Graysmith's Zodiac from 1986, and it's the first time that I've read it. Even though I've talked about the Zodiac for so long, I didn't want to read the book because I knew about its reputation, that it's an error-filled book. It's filled with half-truths and half-falsehoods. But in all seriousness, it's extremely entertaining. I mean, it's because he has this enormous amount of commentary that he has assembled from all types of different sources, people who had firsthand connections to the Zodiac case, and he just lays it all out for you. Mm-hmm. Also, the fact that he lived through these events, it's extremely entertaining, even if now we know a little bit better and we can recognize that you have to separate the fact from the falsehood. So ultimately, I don't think that Graysmith was pure evil, and I certainly don't buy into these things that he was the Zodiac or that he was even an active participant. I just think there's insufficient evidence to support those claims. But, it's really interesting you talk about how there was this parallel between the Zodiac and the Ripper because of the newspapers. And I really had the eye-opening moment when I realized that not only did Jack the Ripper write the letters and the Zodiac wrote letters, but both of them were filled with misspellings. When I was just on a Ripper website and learning that the Ripper letters are filled with these confusing misspellings, I was just like, this is Zodiac to a T. I mean, the Zodiac wrote letters that were filled with misspellings, and both of them are taunting serial killers that are trying to let everybody know that they committed these crimes, no matter who genuinely created the letters. And there are also an extreme amount of similarities in the ways that in which the crimes are committed. And I'm sure we can go through that step by step if you like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think we should do that breakdown. So let me ask this: do you think Zodiac deliberately took the misspellings from Jack's influence from the Jack letters, or is it just
It's
something he?
quite possible.
Yeah.
It's quite possible because I perhaps have been one of the louder voices about how I think that the Zodiac was directly using Jack the Ripper as a playbook. And to know exactly what someone was thinking, was it a conscious influence or an unconscious influence? That I'm not prepared to say. But what
Mhm.
I do genuinely believe is that the Zodiac was familiar with Jack the Ripper and he took elements from the Ripper story and put it into the Zodiac persona. And the misspellings directly, I mean, that could have just been something that he did. And, like, you can halfway remember something. Like,
Sure.
you can think that, oh, yeah, that was a good idea, but not exactly remember that it came from Jack the Ripper.
Yep.
But, it's quite possible that he was doing that intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, and I only raised the question just because of your previous point, and then also because of the fact both killers claimed their own name, created their own moniker. Whereas, Jack was at first, he was what, Leather Apron, and
Yeah.
they're calling him the Whitechapel, I think, killer, and Leather Apron. Same thing with Zodiac. He was what, the Code Killer or the Cipher Slayer,
Yes.
until they write these letters and claim their own moniker. So that writing the letters, after the crimes, the misspellings and claiming the own moniker. If Ned said, like, if all three were conscious decisions, that could be three of them. So of course with Jack, we have his five canonicals in Whitechapel, as well as the double event, which I found interesting because Zodiac, of course, he has the four canonicals but five victims. So it's almost lines up pretty close. You know what I mean? Just for.
Well, it does line up pretty close, but what I think is fascinating about that is after the third Zodiac killer crime, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the Zodiac walked back to the victim's car and wrote a message on the car door.
Hmm.
After the third night of Ripper activity, there is a message that is not written on a vehicle but on a wall, the
Hmm.
Goulston Street graffito. And they're done in somewhat ways and they convey different types of messages, but
Hmm.
after the third day, there is this message, and after the third night, there is this message.
Hmm.
Now, Ross does point out something very important, and that is that, yes, Jack the Ripper did murder two women in one night, and that's the only time that he possibly did that in widely discussed Ripper crimes. But the Zodiac was known to attack multiple people at once. I mean, Lake Herman, Blue Rock Springs, and Lake Berryessa all have multiple victims. But the fact that a message is written either on a wall or a door of some sort after the third crime, that really does seem like a very intense similarity.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, I had that one in my notes because I agree with you on that. Like, the Brian Hartnell's Lake Berryessa car door versus the Ripper graffito. Um, and the other thing is, how Hewitt mentioned to me that, Zodiac had his headline stolen by the Tate LaBianca murders, and Ned has kind of, done some deep dives on his channel as well. So check out whatever he's got on that playlist. But the pig and whatever was written on the wall in blood at the Tate mansion. It kind of seemed to me like that Lake Berryessa car door thing is like a combination of like an homage to those Southern California murders and the Jack the Ripper thing. It just seemingly like it checks both boxes. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people say, like, what's the point of this in terms of the Zodiac crimes, right? It's got the dates, but he writes his crosshair symbol, right? But he doesn't say, like, this was I was the Zodiac. He doesn't even say Zodiac to the victims. You know what I mean? So it seems a little bit different, like Ned said, of how he goes about Lake Berryessa, but takes the time to calmly walk out of there and write the inscription on the door. And we know from the witness that was in the boat that went and contacted law enforcement that got the Rangers, it's like they were kind of on their way, so he could have been caught. If they showed up a little faster, what if Zodiac's just sitting there writing on the door when they get there while the victims are down there bleeding out after he stabbed him? So it just seems peculiar that he would, like, take the time to write the message, a la how Jack took the time to write the graffito, because he could have, You know, there was police, same situation, right? There's police patrols going around Whitechapel. You know, he could have just did what he did and ran off like the other ones. But like Ned said, he stops and writes this graffito that is apparently washed out by Scotland Yard after.
Well, is there a particular avenue that you'd like to explore? Because we have so many right there. And
Whatever you like, just jump in wherever you like.
number one, even though I zone in a lot on the Zodiac Ripper connections, it is a defendable theory that the Zodiac was upset about the Tate LaBianca murders getting more publicity than him. So he concocted the Lake Berryessa plan. This is an unsolved mystery. We don't necessarily know what the Zodiac was thinking. Lots of people claim that they've identified the Zodiac killer, but it's still an unsolved case. And I mean, this whole thing about how the Zodiac is committing these murders, Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. Then he's writing the letters. He's also made the phone call saying that he committed the crimes. But then we have the Tate LaBianca murders committed by the Manson family. And even though we didn't know that the Manson family were responsible on August 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, we didn't know that they were the responsible parties for the Tate LaBianca murders. We still didn't know, as Ross said, that there was a message written on the wall in blood, as well as it's just the entire nature of the crimes that Sharon Tate was murdered, a famous actress, and that the Zodiac wanted to fight for publicity. So he's got to think, okay, now I got to do something different. I'm going to change the way I'm committing the crimes. I'm no longer going to commit the crimes by gun. I'm going to commit them by knife, and I'm going to write this message on the car door, make another phone call. And the costume that the Zodiac created, the black hooded costume worn at Lake Berryessa, was maybe not intended to be shared with the public. I don't see how he could have known that the victims would have survived long enough to tell the story of the costume, and a lot of people disagree with me on that. I think that that was more done for a personal reason, that this person wanted to create a persona that was more intense than something else. And it's also quite possible that the executioner's hood that he wore already existed and he just modified it a little bit. And Ross has perhaps heard this before, but even though I think that the Ripper was extremely influential on the Zodiac, I think that there was a different influence on Lake Berryessa, and that is the 1966 South Chicago massacre committed by Richard Speck. And I mean, what happens is Richard Speck goes to a townhouse in South Chicago and he holds up 8 student nurses and he just says, "All I want's your money. I'm just trying to get to New Orleans carrying a gun and a knife." And then he cuts off strips of bed sheet and he ties up the nurses more or less. The Zodiac approached Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard saying, "All I want is your money. I'm just trying to get to Mexico." Carries a gun but doesn't use it, commits the crime by knife. The victims are tied up. I think that that was a key inspiration to the South Chicago massacre, for the sole fact that he probably read about it in true crime magazines and he thought this is going to work. And in all sadness, it did work. So I think the Zodiac was a very big follower of true crime cases. And I've heard this discussed a little bit in other circles, but I just I'm surprised that it's been so downplayed that people don't necessarily pay attention to the fact that it's quite likely that the Zodiac was an avid follower of other true crime stories. I said Richard Speck, Jack the Ripper, the Phantom Killer, as well as all of the things in Southern California. The newspapers were all over the Southern California murders, and people read newspapers much more closely in those days than they do today because they didn't have the internet. And I think he followed this stuff very frequently, and he remembered a lot of the details and put them into the Zodiac persona.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ned on that point, and I think he hammered that well. Also, it's rather obvious, you know, call me Captain Obvious, but switching from Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs gun crime to the knife crime at Lake Berryessa, of course, Sharon Tate was stabbed with the knife, and a lot of the Tate LaBianca victims were stabbed with a knife. Of course, Jack the Ripper used the knife for, you know, some sort of blade, right? It's not really 100%, but it's obviously a cutting tool. So that, you know, if you take Sherry Joe Bates totally out of the discussion, because that, I think we're both kind of 50-50 or less on that one, you know, sure, you could say it's a Southern, obviously there was the True Detective magazine articles about it, so you could say it's a Southern California crime that was published in articles and blah, blah, blah. He could know about it that way. But it seems, it's obvious parallel, as I said, but it seems much more direct that, like you said, he had the 45 on him at Lake Berryessa. Could have shot him both in the head. more time to write on the door that way, right? And then more time to escape that way. Instead, shows him the loaded magazine, holsters it, walks back over to the tree and kind of stands there awkwardly, and then comes back with the knife when he thinks they're not looking. So it's like, like you said, it's almost like the Manson family Tate LaBianca crimes pushed him, and then again you do have him using this kind of big blade and writing the inscription. I would argue that switching to the knife and then writing on the car door are like, and again, like Ned said, it could even be a subconscious thing that kind of, hey, that worked for Jack the Ripper in Whitechapel, like it's stuck up there, but it seems a little bit more of like a direct influence. Also, the Moonlight Murders, that's 4 kind of canonical crimes, right? So that's
Yes.
could be another parallel to the Zodiac. So as Ned just said with his whole argument there, that Zodiac is following true crime, or whatever you want to call that, previous cases to 68, 69, and we mean like way previous, going up to 1888 and 46 and all that stuff. It does, from the outside looking in, look a lot like he either copied or he had some kind of blueprint in mind. Like, Jack has these 5 canonicals, and of course there's crimes, the Whitechapel crimes, right? That actual what's it called?
The Whitechapel
dossier.
murder?
It's like 11 murders, right? And then Jack has the 5 canonicals of those, but there's actually ones before those 5 canonical Jacks and ones after. There's the Pinchin Street torso, the torso killer. That's a whole other thing I have in my notes. But that kind of focus on 4, like we said, 5 for Jack, but 1 is a double event, and then 4 for the Tex Phantom. It's almost like he had that blueprint in mind. Of course, we think, spotted at Paul Stein at Presidio Heights, so we don't know. But he could have pushed it. He could have went back to North Bay and did one more, or went back to Berryessa and did one more. But for some reason, he's kind of, other than like writing those letters and insinuating Ratatich, insinuating Riverside, insinuating Donna Lass, insinuating Kathleen Johns, and all of that is kind of up in the air. So, you see what I'm getting at, Ned? Like, he could have pushed it and did one more, but because maybe he got cited, it seemed like wasn't willing to, you know what I mean? So, or go for a double. Why not go for a double vent? Go downtown from Paul Stein to Presidio Heights. Go down to the Tenderloin, which Rodelli always talks about, extremely high crime area. You could probably just take a taxi or shoot anyone you want in the Tenderloin, and no one's gonna probably find out about it for some time because it's the Tenderloin. But instead, he doesn't attempt the double event. He doesn't attempt any other main canonicals. It just so because of that, it tracks more with the Moonlight Murders and the Whitechapel 5 canonicals. I don't know if that made any sense. We'll let Ned respond.
That made a lot of sense, actually. But you talked about how the Whitechapel murders is actually a very large set of homicides that go from 1888 to 1891. And I was just reading Tom Westcott's book, Ripper Confidential. He says they should begin in 1887 with the murder of Emily Horsnell. But I want to point out something, that there is an unconfirmed Ripper crime that occurred on December 20th of 1888, and that is the murder of Rose Milet, which happens, 1 month and 2.5 weeks after the murder of Mary Kelly, Jack the Ripper's final victim, December 20th of 1888. And the Zodiac's first crime was on December 20th of 1968.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's just countless coincidences.
Yes,
if they are coincidences, this could all just be like someone's actually thinking about this. And I said before very clearly on Blackbox Online Radio, well, why not just use the dates of the Ripper activity? Why not just commit a crime on August 30th August 31st, the murder of Polly Nichols, or September 30th or November 9th. I mean, some of the dates that the Ripper actually used. Well, that would be so obvious. Then it wouldn't even be the Zodiac's persona. It would be, this is the knockoff Jack the Ripper persona. Someone wanted to give their own personal spin on very, very overused ideas. The Zodiac was not an original thinker. We can look at countless examples from literature, comic books, the media. The Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan. He's borrowing ideas from everybody. So I don't think that true crime cases are off base. And
Sure.
I mean, did he actually plan out a murder on December 20th to commemorate a possible Jack the Ripper crime, a possible Whitechapel murder? I think so. I mean, but I'm not a psychic or anything like that or a clairvoyant, so I can't necessarily prove that. I just think that it's quite possible.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we have more on that too. So this is exactly why I had Ned on for this. Well, Ned was always coming on for the series anyway, but why I chose this topic because Ned's done an excellent job on his channel with this. So there's actually more on that. For one, I wanted to talk about the seasons of the Moonlight Murders go from February to, I think I have it written down somewhere.
May 3rd.
Yeah, and then Jack is as Jack's a little more gray area, right? As Ned said, because there's crimes before and after the five canonicals, but he's kind of like late summer into fall. I felt like Zodiac was kind of like filling in that gap. Like his was gonna be, maybe he saw it as another, like those were the big three, and he was gonna fill in the seasons because Zodiac kind of parallels. Of course, Ned just mentioned December 20th, but of course everything after that is like July. What is it? It's right after midnight, isn't it? Technically 5th, but it's supposed to be July 4th for Blue Rock Springs to all the way to Paul Stein in October, and that kind of overlaps Jack's territory there. He's like late summer to late fall. So I had to wonder, as Ned was just saying there, I had to wonder if there was some sort of the hunting season, if you will, if Zodiac was conscious of that. But there's even more to what Ned was going on. So the Dear Boss letter arrives September 27th. Is that correct, Ned? That's the Lake Berryessa anniversary, is it not?
Well, that is the date of Lake Berryessa. That date escapes me about what the arrival of the Dear Boss letter. But I would like
Yeah.
to come back to what Ross was just saying because, I mean, it sounds like Ross kind of made this observation independently. I made a very similar observation when I was looking at how Jack the Ripper operated in the summer and the fall. His reign of terror is called the Autumn of Terror, but it's the summer and the fall. It's August 31st of 1888 to November 9th of 1888.
Mm-hmm.
The Phantom Killer, the unidentified serial killer from Texarkana, operated in the winter and the spring. And Ross, what was the first one? February 22nd of 1946, and that went to May
Yep.
3rd of 1946. But
Yep.
it's February to May, the
Yep.
winter and the spring. So you have summer, fall, winter, and spring. And when you look at the Zodiac Killer symbol, you have the four quadrants, and he's calling himself the Zodiac, the calendar. It's almost as if like you have these two inspirations put together. And that's the stuff that I don't like to talk about too much because I really don't want to just act like I'm seeing things where I shouldn't or pattern seeking to get a desired result, but I'm just stating that as a fact. I mean, that could be purely coincidental, but you have somebody who has taken inspiration from these two different serial killers, and his name is relevant to the calendar and the seasons and the changes in the cycles. And all of that just matches up perfectly. The summer and the fall on half of the quadrant, and the winter and the spring on the other half of the quadrant. It all just matches up.
Yeah, 100%, and that's how I felt. He looked like, okay, Phantom targeted, winter to spring, as Ned said. Jack obviously summer to fall, and then like Zodiac is kind of like right in between. And I guess we both were kind of looking at that. Again, it seems like I I think this might fall for all three, but I think for Jack and Zodiac, they're night and weekend killers, right? I think the Phantom is as well. So that could just be like a psychological profile thing, which is, Ned kind of looks into that stuff more than I do, but I was just looking for whatever. So the Saucy Jackie letter that arrives on October 1st, and then the From Hell letter arrives on October 16th. Does that put Paul Stein right in between those, Ned? October 11th? So that.
Well, yes, I mean, that does put Paul Stein between them, but I mean, we aren't necessarily sure that the author of the From Hell letter is the same author as that of the Saucy Jackie postcard. A lot of people believe that there were different letter writers, and I often turn to Dr. Andrea Nini, who made some very good linguistic analysis showing how the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard were most likely written by the same person, but that would exclude the From Hell letter. The From Hell letter is written in a very different style, very different handprinting, and that's the one that contains the half portion of a kidney. We aren't necessarily sure whom that was from, but I mean, so
Yeah,
that
and just disregarding authenticity, if Zodiac is researching, hey, this letter came on this date, or just, overall case, overall case dates, just totally just, it's like now his Stein falls right in between those of the beginning of October, which is like seems like the end of Jack's, autumn of terror there. As Ned just said, the kidney comes, was it in the From Hell letter you said?
Yeah.
Of course, Zodiac includes a piece of Stein's shirt in was it the Halloween card? So that gave me like Jack including the kidney vibes. Obviously, Zodiac could have cut off Stein's finger or a literal piece of him, which he obviously didn't do. But just, people have a lot of questions of why. Obviously, you include the piece of Stein's shirt to say, I'm the guy that wrote the ciphers, I'm the guy that did the murders, blah, blah, blah. It's supposed to track your activity. But, I think we've all questioned this, right, Ned? It's like, there's kind of something peculiar because he didn't cut off a piece of David Faraday's shirt or Darlene Ferrin's slacks, you know what I mean? So it's something that could have been done all along. That's and then again, of course, Presidio is different because it's not the North Bay area, of Vallejo or Benicia. It's actually downtown. So there's a lot of different letters to Presidio Heights is what levels, sure. But just including that piece of Stein's shirt, it sounded like a very Jack thing to do. Just going along with what we're saying with the Jack letters,
Absolutely. And that's something that I've been talking about for a long time, that I've thought about for a long time. And that is that he cut off a piece of Paul Stein's shirt from the backside of it. And, the kidney is located on the backside of the body. And of course, he's not going to cut out Paul Stein's kidney. He probably didn't even know how. But he could cut off a piece of the bloody shirt. And again, that's using Jack the Ripper as a playbook. And it's not even any type of grand plan that would have been hatched. He doesn't have to go through the Ripper story with a fine-tooth comb. It's just, after the fourth night of Zodiac activity, he cut off a piece of the bloody shirt and mailed it in. After the fourth Jack the Ripper victim, the kidney was cut out, and half a kidney was mailed to George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. And, again, it was half a kidney, and Paul Stein's shirt was also cut up into multiple segments and mailed in with multiple communications. He didn't even mail in the whole piece of the shirt. So, yes, I think he was using Jack the Ripper as a playbook for that one.
Yeah, and again, anybody could point these out, guys. Some of this stuff is kind of obvious, and then we're kind of trying to, as far as dates and seasons, Ned and I are trying to dig a little bit deeper and see what else could be there. And again, this is only a few days research on this topic, guys. I haven't looked at Jack in forever. I'm just simply interested in this connection. We'll take a quick question for Ned. What if Zodiac wrote on the car door at Lake Berryessa in anticipation of killing the two people? So is he suggesting that he wrote on it first on his way walking down there? I mean, I think it's pretty confirmed that Zodiac wrote it after, although I don't know exactly how they determined that. I'm not a forensic.
Well, I'd like to respond to that, actually, because the way that I interpreted that question was that Voodoo Baby, firstly, thanks for the question, is that did the Zodiac expect that both victims would die? And this is completely away from the Ripper parallels, even though I think very highly of them. It's something that people talk about a lot. Was the Zodiac only trying to murder 5 people? Did he have a specific reason why 5 victims were targeted? And he thought that Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell were both going to pass away. And the reason why he wrote the message on the car door was to conclude the Zodiac's reign of terror, that he thought that would have been the final crime. Then, what happened? Brian Hartnell survived the Lake Berryessa stabbing. So then he's like, oh, well, now my whole plan is completely off. I need to think about what I'm going to do next. And then he's going to murder Paul Stein, the taxi driver. It was something that he didn't put an enormous amount of thought into, but a little bit, because he had 2 weeks to plan that murder. But that's just a possibility. As I said, it's an unsolved case, so numerous things are possible. And here's something that I do discuss a lot on Zodiac Monday. There are multiple theories that are defendable. There are multiple things that make sense, as opposed to just only one single theory on all of the Zodiac case.
Yeah, 100%. No, I really like Ned's take on that. I haven't thought much about that, but there does appear to be something kind of kind of disorganized and without closure of Brian surviving, and then just you can almost see the panic in Zodiac, like Ned said. Like, he gets the headlines stolen from him from Tate LaBianca, Southern California activity. He thinks he's going to have this kind of grandiose masterpiece at Lake Berryessa, and once again there's some mistakes there. In my opinion, that's a recreation of Gaviota Beach, whether he was actually there in person or just found out about it through research, like Ned said. So if that is the Zodiac, you could almost kind of say he botched them both, right? Because if Robert Dominguez punches him in the face, he messes it up the first time when he tries to, well, he does kill the couple, but he messes it up and runs away with a bloody nose. Tries to come back and correct his mistakes the second time, only using the knife, where he obviously used in my opinion, allegedly, in my opinion, he uses the gun at Gaviota, but obviously uses the knife at Berryessa. Then Hartnell survives, you know what I mean? And then that's where you get all this criticism of, most of his women victims are dying, but the men keep surviving. So a solo male, he's going to show us that he's a tough guy by shooting an unwitting, taxi driver in the back of the head, who's probably not even looking when he's bringing him to his fare. So that really showed us that sarcasm, folks. What does Ned think of Krister Holmgren's suspect Charles Lechmere? Just doing a little bit of Jack.
Oh, sure. Charles Lechmere is one of the top suspects. And when I did the suspect episode, like suspect profiles rating on Blackbox Online Radio's Ripper Wednesday, I put Charles Lechmere in the top tier. And I mean, Krister Holmgren is one of the chief proponents of that theory, but another one is named Edward Stowe, who runs the House of Lechmere channel. And he has some very good analysis because he shows how Charles Lechmere is walking to work on August 31st of 1888. He was a cartman who pushed carts of meat. And according to the analysis that is done by Stowe, he should have had 8 minutes unaccounted for when nobody seems to know where he is. 2 people find the body of Polly Nichols, the first Jack the Ripper victim, and there are Charles Lechmere and Robert Paul. And the actual story is that Robert Paul sees Charles Lechmere standing in front of the body, and that, he's at the crime scene. And again, if this is true, he should have had 8 minutes unaccounted for when the murder could have taken place. I think he's an excellent suspect in the murder of Polly Nichols, and people have talked about how, well, all right, if there's this other witness who found the body, then why didn't he just murder him and try and run away? Well, for the very simple reason that people with sociopathic tendencies don't always resort to violence. Sometimes they try to talk their way out of it, to deceive people with language. The Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, no matter whom they were probably all about that. Definitely. 110% the Zodiac was about trying to deceive people in his own sociopathic way. But as far as Charles Lechmere, he's an excellent suspect in that murder. Krister Holmgren will expand this well beyond Jack the Ripper and also say that he believes that Charles Lechmere was responsible for the Thames Torso murders. I think that those were quite a different set of homicides. The women in the Jack the Ripper case were disemboweled, and the Thames Torso killer dismembered the bodies, cutting them up and putting them into the Thames. And there's one victim in the Thames Torso murders that is buried, right, like loosely buried. And but anyway, Jack the Ripper did none of that. He disemboweled the victims and he left them where they were, including Mary Kelly, who was left indoors. And the Ripper most likely had the opportunity to move her body if he chose to do that, but he didn't. So I'm seeing quite a different serial killer there. But yes, Lechmere is a strong suspect, but the problem is there are also lots of other strong Ripper suspects.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And then also, there's police patrols in the area, so if you're standing over the body of the murder you just committed, a witness comes up and sees you standing there, are you going to take the time? Again, double event aside, right? Double event aside, because that was just who knows what happened there. That was just some crazy, seemingly impulsive, spur of the moment type of thing. You kill the first, witness that walks up, and now you kind of just doubled the time that you're standing there, and now police patrol comes upon you, and now there's not one body that you could explain, hey, this body was just here when I got here. Oh, there's just 2 bodies here when I got here, officer. It's not really going to be any kind of defense that's going to get you out of that moment.
Fair enough.
Another one. It's kind of going back to Berryessa stuff. I think Zodiac assumed both of them dead. He reported a double murder in his phone call. Yeah, it kind of shows that he didn't stick around to make sure Brian bled out. You know, he went to go right on the car door, which is what Ned and I were saying. You know.
And some people really look at the language of the Zodiac killer's phone call when he says, "I want to report a murder, no, a double murder," and they're like, "Oh, that means that Brian Hartnell was an active participant in all of this because the person knew that he would survive." Nonsense. I don't entertain that for a second. I think that, I'll just give credit to the person who made this observation. His name is Rick Hansen, a longtime follower of Blackbox Online Radio, who simply said that there is nothing inaccurate about the Zodiac statement. I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. Yes, he murdered one person and he thought that he had murdered two people.
Yeah.
I think that's just a common sentence in the English language, and that's all that it is. Yeah, the Zodiac was planning on murdering both of them. And I've received some backlash for that. Some people believe that the Zodiac wanted to keep at least one victim alive so he could tell the story of the costume. He or she, mind you. Most likely he, because Cecilia was stabbed more times at Lake Berryessa, but the risk of that is just too high. I mean, Brian Hartnell could have very well died at Lake Berryessa, and I don't think that's what the Zodiac was intending. I think he wore the costume for a couple different reasons. Number one, Mike Mageau had survived the Blue Rock Springs shooting, so he was where the victims could survive and identify him. Number two, there was a specific reason for wearing it, and again, as we said, about acting out some type of larger fantasy because he wanted to compete with the Tate LaBianca murders in his own mind. I believe that the hood was heavily inspired by the 1963 film Shock Corridor, which features a character puts on a pillowcase hooded costume with a circle and a cross going through it, and he says, "This is a cyclos. It comes from kuklos." Oh, no, it's a kuklos. It comes from the Greek cyclos, and it's a circle that allows you to be invisible to your enemies. You can be part of the invisible empire, and I think the Zodiac was doing exactly that. Just something that was a little bit symbolic for him, and that's one thing that Drew Beeson has said very clearly, just that the Lake Berryessa hood had meaning to him. He was the only person that, he was trying to entertain with that thing. And I've pointed out how I really do think that the hooded costume already existed, and it was just quickly modified. Like, maybe the Zodiac knew how to sew a little bit, and there was this executioner's hood costume that existed for some reason, and it was just like, just sew on the symbol, maybe modify the thing with the sunglasses, clip-on sunglasses, and that's it. It could have been something that was used in the theater. It could have been something that was used for performances. It could have been just a replica for some historical reason. Numerous possibilities have been put forward about how and why the Lake Berryessa hood was created. But the ultimate thing is, I think that he was also trying to paralyze the victims with fear. Let's focus in on that for a second. Number one, you're not just getting approached by Joe Schmo with a handgun. This guy's wearing this really weird costume, and no matter what, if you saw that at any time of day, what are we talking about, 6:15 on a Sunday night or whenever it was, and then you're going to be like, what's going on? Partnered with the fact that he's telling the story that's in the exact same way that Richard Speck told the story about the not South Chicago massacre. All I want's your money. I'm just trying to get to New Orleans or Mexico. That puts the victims in a false sense of security. That's what I think the whole story was about. He says, I escaped from a prison in Montana. I killed a guard. I'm trying to get to Mexico. All of that's false. He's not trying to go to Mexico because he murdered Paul Stein 2 weeks later. He's just trying to make the victims think that he's not going to hurt them. And that's more or less what I think the Zodiac was doing at Lake Berryessa. He wanted the victims to be scared. He wanted them to comply and go along with his orders. And he had a specific reason for killing them or attempting the murder of Brian Hartnell. Brian survived, and murdering Cecilia Shepard. So I don't really think it's that complicated. He wanted to scare the victims. He wanted to tie them up. He wanted to stab them. He wanted attention. He wanted to think that he was tough. And this gets back into something that is so much bigger. And Even though I don't think that Richard Walter was a perfect person, the psychological profiler, he made some very interesting observations about the Zodiac killer. Mike Rodelli loves to talk about him. Ross has interviewed Mike Rodelli before, so I mean, you can watch the stuff on Ross's channel or my channel when Mike shares his observations. And that is that the Zodiac is doing different things to fuel his own excitement and to prove that not only can he commit the crimes, but he can also get away with it. You have the Lake Herman Road murders, committing the crimes by gun. Blue Rock Spring shooting, committing the crimes by gun. He's already proven to himself that he can do that and get away with it. Now, what does he have to do? Commit a stabbing by knife wearing a hooded costume in the daylight. The sun's starting to set a little bit, 6:30 p.m., September 27th, but in the daylight. Then he's already done that and gotten away with it. Left a signature on the car door when Ross said, at any time, somebody could have walked by, a park ranger could have driven by, could have been interrupted by Bill White or Dennis Land or somebody.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote the message on the car door, got away with it. Now he wants to commit a murder in a populated area like Presidio Heights, more populated than the lakeside at Lake Berryessa, when there was literally no one else around, for hundreds of meters. So he's going to commit the Stein murder in a populated area, and he's going to walk down the street, walk past police officers even, and he got away with that too. Now he has proven to himself that he has committed murder, he has avoided the police, he's even talked to police officers, Donald Falcon, Eric Zones, and he got away with that too.
Real quick on that one, Ned, they say they didn't talk to him, but
I don't believe that.
If you look it up, you're going to get two versions of the story. So
I don't believe that for a second. I think
this is interesting. Go in on your take on that then.
Well, now he's proven that he can get away with a crime. He can walk away from the scene and not get caught in a city. He's done everything that he wanted to do. Committed murders, gotten away with it, written the letters. He's done all of that stuff. So now he can just focus and concentrate on creating the letters, maybe additional ciphers like the Z13 and the Z32, and make these empty bomb threats that mean nothing. He's not actually going to detonate a bomb because he doesn't have to kill people anymore. He's proven that he can kill people. Now he's just going to write these taunting letters because he knows he's most likely not going to get caught. And the sad thing is, no matter what your theory is, the Zodiac was right. He didn't get caught.
Yeah. No, it's for sure. I mean, a lot to unpack there. So just going back to Lake Berryessa real quick. So yeah, I mean, Ned's heard me say this before. Like, I 100% think the executioner costume is ritualistic. Now he comes. So I just watched the all the bonus features on the Zodiac Blu-ray. Of course, there's like his name was Arthur Lee Allen, and then there's the interviews about all the canonicals. And Brian literally said what Ned just said, which was, I thought that when I gave him my keys and I offered to comply, they didn't really have any money on him, but hey, I'll give you whatever changes my pocket. He literally said that I thought, because I was going along with him, that there wasn't any threat, until he started tying him up, and then they wouldn't be able to, at that point, obviously you can't just get up and leave because you're hogtied. But, going to what Ned said about, like, people believing that his choice was to, like, Brian was accomplice or keep Brian alive, you guys got to keep in mind, they're tied face down, like, arms tied to their legs, stabbed in the back to a place, by the water's edge, which is going to get very cold when the sun goes down. Like, Brian actually says that, like, hey, you shouldn't tie us up, it gets cold out here. So it doesn't really make any sense. Now, when you listen to Brian's actual interview, because it's on that Blu-ray, when he goes to try to, she helps him get it untied, or she bites it with her teeth or whatever, so they get it enough that he can get back up. When he actually tries to walk, he's lost so much blood that he's blacking out and falling down. So if you think somebody in that shape was like, again, it's like saying, and Ned and I have talked about this before, the blade narrowly missed Brian's heart by, what was it, an inch or less than an inch? So
I heard it was a millimeter.
Yeah, so I think it was very, very close. So let's say it's a millimeter, right? Now you guys are supposing that Zodiac is some kind of surgical genius with a blade that big that he's going to be able to be like, hold on, Brian, you're going to be my accomplice. Don't worry, I'm just going to miss your heart by a millimeter. And he's going to trust him to stab him with a giant butcher knife. Like, the whole thing falls apart pretty quick, guys. It's just, what if he misses and he says, hey, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to let you be alive so you can see my costume, he totally misses and he kills him anyway. Then the plan doesn't work, right? So, you know what I mean?
I just don't think there's any evidence to support anything other than the
Yeah,
Zodiac wanted to murder both Brian and Cecilia.
I agree.
And I mean, a lot of the things about looking at Brian Hartnell as an accomplice tie into his behavior when he's being interviewed. They don't think that he's being normal. They thought he went along with the Zodiac's request too easily. But Brian said very clearly in those bonus features of the documentaries that he did that because he felt that he could risk his own life, but he didn't want to risk Cecilia's. And she told him, go along with it. And he's like, he's doing that because, as he
Now
said, he
that's
didn't want to gamble with her life.
Yeah, exactly. And that is specifically in reference to him saying to her, hey, I think I can get the gun. Now, Brian's 6'7", Ned, so
Yes,
he's
he was
obviously
that.
bigger than Zodiac, you know what I mean? And as Ned just said there, he didn't feel... I think he actually says on the bonus features, hopefully if Hartnell sees this, I don't butcher it. It's highly unlikely that he will. It's just, even though we're the #1 show on YouTube. But he's willing to risk his own life to try to get the gun, but when she tells him, like, nah, like, I don't think you should, just go along with it. Well, what if Brian, like, tries to get the gun and Zodiac shoots Cecilia? Then it's kind of on him because he created the situation. The other thing is, going back to, like what Ned said with the whole cover story and the Chicago quote, is going back to, like, my new episode that's coming out soon, episode 4 of Gaviota Beach, Dominguez Edwards, when Linda's bathing suit is cut. If he said something to Bobby like, oh, I'm going to take Linda's bathing suit off and do whatever I want with her, and came way more aggressive, well, that's what triggers Bobby to fight back, which is what Brian was considering doing at Lake Berryessa. You see what I'm saying? As opposed to what Ned just said, he comes with a cover story. Hey, I just want your car. I killed a couple guards in the escaping prison. Well, he's establishing that, like, I just killed somebody on my escape from prison. I just need your car. But if you get in my way, I just told you I'm on my way from killing someone else. And if those were actual prison guards, you guys are just two people on a picnic in Lake Berryessa. What do you think I'm going to do to you? So it pre-establishes, hey, I just told you what I just did. That this is what I'm prepared, capable, ready to do. As just the same type of thing, so he tosses him the keys or whatever, he tosses him on the blanket, and then it's kind of like Ned said, like, yes, I'm gonna steal your car and drive to Mexico from Napa doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? But but he comes with the cover story anyway, you know what I mean? Like Ned said, it's a little bit of a far-fetched one, but he has it ready, Like,
Well, absolutely. And as I said, I think he took it from the South Chicago Massacre because it was a geographic location that was to the south, exactly the way that Richard Speck said. So,
yep.
I mean, it's not practical the way he's talking about it, but I mean, that's what I think he was doing.
Right. Yeah, I agree too. Yeah, it's like if you take a little bit, like, so it's like, so you're gonna drive here from the Bay Area down to the Mexico border, and it's like, what happens if you get pulled over along the way, and you have your executioner hood in the car with you? You're gonna have some explaining to do.
Yeah.
We have probably another question for Ned. Any of you know if any handwriting expert ever matched the writing on Hartnell's Carmen Gia with that of any of the early Zodiac letters? Like, to my understanding, like, moral, but I know his opinion has come under question, so we'll let Ned respond.
Oh, yes. I think it's exactly what Ross said. I believe that Sherwood Morrill did authenticate the handwriting on the car door and said that it was authentic, but Sherwood Morrill made an enormous amount of claims. One of them that was that the 3 letters that were written in the spring of 1967, the Bates Had to Die letters, were also that of the Zodiac Killer.
And the death poem.
Yes. See, a lot of things in Riverside. And I don't believe they were because of the recent developments that have happened in the case where most people now believe that it was a prankster who wrote the Bates Had to Die letters in the spring of 1967, the guy that admitted to it, and Riverside PD even went public with it. There are still people who hold out, but I don't believe that actually was the killer. I don't believe it was the Zodiac. I believe it was indeed the prankster. Mm-hmm. And I was just reading the book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation, by Prash from Prash's Murder Map, actually. And in that book, he makes the bold claim that handwriting experts might not even be as much of an expert as they actually think. They might not even be that well equipped to make those types of decisions. I mean, he's very critical of them, saying that the average amateur sleuth can probably make similar observations
Hmm.
compared to what handwriting experts do. And I'm not that extreme. I'm really not. But um, you have to have some type of doubts when Sherwood Moyle is making all of these statements, and some of them turn out to be wrong.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Then there's other Sherwood's colleagues that kind of disagreed with some of his suppositions. I mean, of course, the way he's depicted in the movie is the guy's drinking in every single scene, so they're trying to, give you this thing that at the end of his life he, fell off and, became an alcoholic or whatever. I personally haven't looked into his personal life that much, so I,
Yes.
don't know how accurate that is, but it all stands, that's even a deeper conversation. Ned and I could probably do a whole entire show on that with Richard Grinnell. Once you get to the 78 letters and the Exorcist, you basically almost have almost all of the handwriting experts disagreeing with you, or two agree with each other, and then one doesn't. And the later the letters get, you start to have like more and more differing opinions, which is certainly interesting. I don't know, it actually leads us anywhere from a handwriting analysis perspective. Real quick on Jack, and then I say we switch gears to the Moonlight Murders, because I think Ned's done a really good job on that, and there's some good stuff there. Jack loves using the word shan't, and I don't know if that's the Dear Boss letter or all of them. And then of course Zodiac is using shall all the time. I found the words, neither are really common in our modern lexicon, but I just found it similar that Jack is using shan't a lot, and then Zodiac is using shall. I mean, like Ned said, that could be a subconscious thing, or it could be, kind of more direct influence,
Well, as far as like why the person is doing this and are they aware of it, I could be wrong about this, but I think the Zodiac entered into persona mode when he was writing the letters. The phone calls, the crimes, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, all of that was done where he's almost like an actor in character, that he's not necessarily talking even with his natural speech pattern or natural tone of voice. Everything about the Zodiac killer's voice is described as unnatural, monotone, unusual speaking cadence. I think the same is true of his word choice in the letters. I think that he was more or less just playing a character, and that's why the word choice sounds bizarre. But let's go through some of these things with Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac, just kind of like summing it all up. I said that the first Zodiac crime occurred on the possible Ripper crime anniversary of the murder of Rose Milet, and that is something that I found, just like years into this thing. And I also talked about how there's the seasons and the zodiac symbols divided into the four quadrants. You have the Phantom Killer and the Ripper, and then even looking at the message on the corridors written after the third crime, and the Wilson Street graffiti has been written after the third night of Ripper activity, mailing in the kidney, mailing in the pieces of the bloody shirt, the cut bloody shirt, mind you.
Yep.
The letters that are both filled with misspellings. The Ripper letters contain numerous misspellings. The Zodiac letters contain numerous misspellings. And I think that a lot of people really don't go between Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac. I have found that a lot of people that I interact with, because of Blackbox Online Radio, really focus on only one of the mysteries. So a lot of people follow both of them, but there are also a lot of people that don't. And I think that that's one of the big reasons why a lot of these observations haven't been made about how Jack the Ripper was one of the prime influences on the Zodiac, and how he's using Jack the Ripper as a playbook. Because I think that the coincidences, similarities, and influences are just too big to ignore. And ultimately, that could have been the Zodiac's master plan to become a 20th century Jack the Ripper.
100%. I think that's exactly what it was, and mostly such. I mean, there's all the stuff Ned mentioned, but the letter writing campaign, like, strikes as, one of the hot ones. And then, of course, I mentioned this before, Zodiac adding the ciphers to his letters, kind of ensuring that he gets this front page treatment. He even complains about it in some of his letters, like, oh, I don't like that one because they bury me on the back. So he kind of has this obsession with the front page attention, and then later adding the ciphers, which it's like, that's kind of, in my opinion, his way to take it up a notch. You know, obviously Jack's thing was a much more condensed thing, and then of course you have the backdrop of like Whitechapel having all these, a very violent neighborhood and having all these other crimes. Like that's I kind of a key difference I would say with Zodiac is none of that stuff really happened in violent neighborhoods. At least, I mean, that's way before my time, so I don't really. I assume that late 60s, you know, Vallejo and Benicia was relatively tame. Obviously, we know Presidio Heights is a very affluent neighborhood, and then Lake Berryessa, like Ned said, is in the middle of nowhere. It's a camping destination, you know. It's a fishing location. So.
But there was drug dealing in Vallejo, and there were
Yep.
these drug dealing gangs because
Sure.
David Faraday was even supposed to get into a fight with somebody who
Yep.
was pushing grass at the local high school. That's what's
Yep.
often said. But see, selling marijuana. I mean, we can just
Yeah.
kind of lay it out like that. And David was a very anti-drug person because he was a clean-cut guy, and they have this type of dispute. And I mean, that guy was possibly connected to a gang that was possibly connected to the Hells Angels, and they were
Yep.
all in on the drug trade. So there definitely is crime, but not to the level of Whitechapel, because
Right.
there's this commonly held belief that even though Whitechapel had lots of crime, murder was not extremely common there. And I have some mixed feelings about that because I've just talked to you about some of the possible um, murders that could be attributed to Jack the Ripper.
Mm.
And I mean, and even saying that, you know, in Tom Westcott's book, when I was just reading about the murder of Emily Horsnell, which occurred in November of 1887, where she is just beaten up and kicked to death by multiple men. And she actually passes away later on in the lodging house. But she's still attacked by multiple men and murdered. Emma Smith in the spring of 1888, attacked by multiple men and murdered. And then you get to the summer of 1888 or in August with the murder of Martha Tabram. And it's quite possible that that was indeed the Ripper. And
Mm.
I'm not 100% sure. I'm about 80% convinced that that was Jack the Ripper. And that was the same serial killer who murdered the 5 women, canonical fives in both cases, as Ross pointed out, just another one of the shocking similarities. But and also the most widely discussed possible victim is a stabbing that took place before the serial killer's main reign of terror: the murder of
Yep.
Martha Tabram with Jack the Ripper, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates with the Zodiac. Bizarre ways as history repeats itself.
Yeah, and that's another point is the pre-canonicals and post-canonicals in both cases, which are super interesting. I think one thing Ned alluded to there, so it wasn't necessarily murder, but there was a lot of low crime. So Whitechapel was extremely overpopulated. Think of something like 80,000 people, a lot of people
Yeah.
sleeping in the streets. I don't know if you heard about this, Ned, but in some of those rental houses, they would have a rope, and then for
Yeah.
10 pence you could sleep on the rope with your body hanging over it, and that's where the quote hangover, that's where the phrase hangover comes from. So just imagine that a place that's so overpopulated people can't have beds, so they'll pay a 10 pence to sleep hanging over a rope. And then there was also a lot of gang crime, so there's this theory that perhaps these gangs that Ned just alluded to, attacking these prostitutes and women, or robbing them, raping them, killing them, whatever they're doing, and then perhaps Jack starts in one of those gangs and then splits off by himself, although that, you know, it seems kind of unlikely, but that's just one thing that's been floated. The other thing Ned just alluded to, and I'll relate this back to Zodiac, Ned, the torso killer crimes is, you know, Ned mentioned this, there's the Thames River crimes and these multiple torsos that pop up. It's like a headless body, legless, and then I think one of them still had the arm attached to it, kind of going on right around the vicinity of those Whitechapel Jack canonicals. And again, maybe it's nothing, Ned, but you know, it's kind of thought, is Jack the torso killer? Is it different? That strikes me as the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, Ned, is you kind of have this string of, in both cases, and again, call it, you know, synchronicity or just a sick coincidence. You have the main canonical kind of letter writing campaign, the Zodiac crimes and the Jack crimes, and then, you know, right outside the Jack crimes, you have the torso killer. Right outside the Zodiac's canonicals, or right next door rather, in Santa Rosa, you have the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, where it's the same type of thing. Is it, you know, it's, you know, theorized maybe, Zodiac is the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murder, although it doesn't really seem to match his MO in any way, much like the torso killer doesn't match Jack's MO. So I don't know if that's a sick, twisted thing about humanity, Ned, where you have multiple serial killers operating in the same kind of hunting grounds, which is what it looks like. But I have to think that that's something that Zodiac would have known about if he was researching Jack the Ripper. The rest of the Whitechapel crimes would have came up, the torso killers and the other ones you mentioned, the pre and post canonicals. Again, I don't know how interested Zodiac was in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, although it was going on in the town next door to him. So if you knew something about it or not, that just struck me as like interesting that you kind of have these, in both cases, almost a century apart from each other. You have seemingly like at least two serial killers operating almost on top of each other. I don't know what your take on that is. It just seems crazy.
My take on that is that there are a lot more serial killers out there than people genuinely think about from time to time on a day-to-day basis. There are more serial killers operating. And that's the question that we get with the Thames torso killer. Is it not possible that there were just two different serial killers operating at the same time? Because as Ross just said, a high concentration of people, 70, 80,000 people are in Whitechapel, overpopulated area, not to mention the whole of London. Multiple serial killers operating, that's not beyond belief. That's not like some type of astronomical calculation. The Zodiac killer and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer, that's not astronomical. I've talked about so many possible Zodiac crimes on Blackbox Online Radio, things that are just going all up and down the spectrum. We're talking 1965, 66, 67, and all of these years before the Zodiac truly started operating in 1968. There are so many murders that are taking place, and quite possible there are serial killers that were operating and somewhat of a lesser known way, like flying under the radar, but these murders were widely reported on in the papers, most of them. And definitely there are perhaps ones that are a little bit more high profile, but the ones that the Zodiac gets accused of were definitely widely reported on, and there's all types of things that people can read online for free. I've even done readings of some of the old articles on Blackbox Online Radio about the murders of Ray Davis and Domingos Edwards, the Swindles, and even there's this great article that was talking about how the Swindles were murdered in 1964, Johnny Ray and Joyce Swindle, and someone is just kind of speculating, could this not be the same killer who murdered Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards in 63? 4 years before the Zodiac committed the Lake Herman Road murders. People are already thinking about this, hey, was this the same killer? And it seems like, as Michael Cole would say, there was a sweetheart slayer on the loose. And yes, he's quoting the local media at the time, but he's been one person who really tries to bring that to people's attention, that it was widely believed that there were connections among the Southern California pre-canonical crimes.
Yeah, that's always what I find so interesting when I float Zodiac as a suspect for Domingos Edwards, because a lot of times when I post it on, on the Tappa Talk forum or other places, like I get the pushback, and I'm like, it seems like some of these people are saying like, I pulled this out just because it's a male-female couple on the beach in Southern California, and that one is really, that was Santa Barbara. It's kind of like between the Bay Area and Southern California, so it's a little bit closer as opposed to Davis and the Swindles and the ones you just mentioned. But when you go back and read, it's Sheriff Webster saying that there's a strong link. Armstrong, Baker, it's almost all of them, and it was all said way back then. Now I know what people are going to say is a lot of that stuff didn't catch fire until after the Zodiac crimes, which obviously that's going to be the case because the amount of publicity it received. But as far as MO, it still seems similar. I would love to see that footprint size from Gaviota Beach, Ned, just to see if it's the same size as LB. But neither here nor there. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker thing and the multiple serial killers operating in the same vicinity, as we said, it strikes me as when Zodiac writes that letter talking about like the bombing of the police station, and he's like, specifically that quote, it wouldn't do good to move in on someone else's territory. It always like makes me feel like, well, what about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, dude? Like that is like right in your backyard, Zodiac, and you've really never, like, what happens if the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murderer got caught, right? Or just, let's say, like a strong suspect, and he's like, he comes out and then he wants to catch the headline, so he's like, I'm the Zodiac. You know, what would Zodiac have done at that point? It seems like he would have did what he did in when Aranchak and Blake solved the cipher, and he said, like, I'm not the guy that called in on the show. You would assume Zodiac would have wrote some letter and been like, hey, I'm not the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murderer. If that guy I would have liked to have seen what would have happened if someone would have taken credit for both, you know, just to see if Zodiac would have responded, you know. That's just me completely spitballing, you know, just out of curiosity.
Well, no, I agree with that, though. I think that that's what Zodiac would have done. He would have sent in some type of letter. I mean, as I understand, he still has a small piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt that he never mailed in, so he could have used that, or Paul Stein's wallet, driver's license, something that Paul Stein owned to prove that he was the killer. Something of that sort.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do some Moonlight Murders, because this is a super interesting case, and I mostly found out about this case from Ned's channel. I'd actually never heard of it. So, in 1946, there's these 4, I guess if you want to call them canonicals, and I know the last one is has some differences because the caliber of the weapon changes. Killer wears a bag type, you know, sack mask, which a lot of people have, you know, compared to the Lake Berryessa hood, a hooded type sack mask. Again, he's killing male-female couples. I mean, there is a sexual assault element in this case, which you don't really have in the Zodiac crimes. One thing I noticed, Ned, I think 3 of the times the killer stole the car and dumped it, drove it northward. You mentioned Ray Davis earlier. That kind of struck me as a Ray Davis vibe, because he took the taxi and he drove it up a couple blocks, and I just wondered, like, man, I wonder if that could be like an homage to the Moonlight Murders, you know, just because it seemed like he was stealing the cars and, you know, and dumping them or whatever. That's just a random jumping off point.
As far as jumping off point, yes. Well, the first crime committed by the Phantom Killer was on February 22nd of 1946, and that is the attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae. And that is the one where there's the sexual assault that takes place. Mm-hmm. But this is the only time we have a witness sighting of the killer wearing his hooded costume, which, as Ross said, was mostly a sack that was put over the killer's face. Not like the Lake Berryessa hood, which was a detailed executioner's hood by Brian Hartnell's own admission, done with care and precision. This was just a sack that had holes cut out for the eyes and possibly something for the mouth. And this person didn't even kill both of the victims or any of the victims in the first attack. It was an assault. And Jimmy Hollis was actually beaten with the gun, not shot, but beaten with the gun, and he had a skull fracture. And Mary Jean LeRae was sexually assaulted. Then, what's the date of the next one? We're going to March 24th of 1946, the attack on Richard Griffin and Pollyann Moore. And this is when we actually have the Phantom Killer murdering the victims. But the issue is, we do not have a sighting of the perpetrator in the hooded costume. And this is when things start to kind of get into the world of speculation, because when I was doing the Phantom Killer series, for so long, I was just wondering, wait a second, is this the same killer? But with the Phantom Killer's next crime, the perhaps most famous murder, the murder of Betty Jo Booker, this is when you have the same caliber firearm being used. And in most sources, it states that it was an automatic .32 pistol that was used to kill the victims in the second and third attacks. And then this goes to show that there probably was a single Phantom Killer. And in one source, in Bronson Malsh's book, he states that it was a .38 caliber firearm, but I'm pretty sure it was a .32. That's what's widely reported. And a lot of things, we'll see the .38 thing popping up from time to time in discussions. Then after that crime, after the third one, we have the murder of Virgil Starks. And this is when the Phantom Killer is going to completely deviate from his pattern, because he's not going to attack couples that are parked in cars in secluded areas. He's going to go after Virgil and Katie Starks, who are in a farmhouse. Virgil Starks owned the farmhouse, and as I understand, he just sat back in his armchair and he was listening to a radio program when he's shot by the Phantom Killer, not using the .32 caliber pistol. He was using a .22 caliber, and we aren't even sure if it's a rifle or a pistol, just like the Zodiac case. But some people believe that it was a rifle because they think that this was a single killer. This was the same person. It's just he knew a little bit about guns, and he's not going to use a 32 automatic pistol to shoot somebody who's sitting in a farmhouse from a distance. He's going to use a rifle. He has a 22 caliber rifle, but he also tries to murder Virgil Starks' wife, Katie, but she's able to get away. She does not get any solid look at the perpetrator, and we have no idea if the perpetrator was wearing the hooded costume or not. A lot of people believe that Virgil Starks was murdered by the Phantom Killer, and a lot of people believe that he wasn't. There was a forensic psychologist who examined this case named Dr. Anthony LaPalla, and he came up with the statement. I mean, I don't know if it's his original observation, but he definitely promoted it. And that was that a killer like the Phantom Killer or the Zodiac or Jack the Ripper is going to commit the first three crimes, the first 3 nights of activity are going to follow the pattern. Attacking couples parked in cars at lovers' lanes. With Jack the Ripper, he's murdering women outside. With the Zodiac, attacking couples parked in cars in lovers' lanes. And then with the fourth crime, he's going to deviate from the pattern. The fourth night of activity, he's going to deviate from the pattern. And that's what the Phantom Killer did. He's attacking people in cars in secluded areas. Then he attacks Virgil Starks, who's sitting in his own chair in a farmhouse. The Phantom Killer goes on to become a home invader. And it's quite possible that that wasn't the Phantom Killer at all, that was just someone who had a dispute with Virgil Starks. Different type of firearm, completely different MO. And I go back and forth a lot about the likelihood of that actually being the killer. You can see the doubts I have about how, was there really a serial killer or not? And if it weren't for the ballistics, I might be a little bit less convinced. But I guess I'll turn it back to Ross.
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting case, and I love Ned's take on it. So I know that there's the one of the victims has the instrument, and I can't remember. So there's the whole thing there. I can't remember if it was actually involved in one of the crimes, but I know in that first one he hit the victim so hard he tells like the girl to run, and then he chases her down and says like, "What are you running for?" And she's like, "Cause you told me to." So it's just like a totally inconsistent, like schizophrenic attitude. He hits the male victim so hard with the blunt object that she thought that the dude got shot because it was so loud, and like Ned said, it was actually his skull getting fractured from the blunt trauma. Then they give an inconsistent description of the assailant. He says that it was like a white male with a mask on. She says it was a light-skinned, African-American male. So right off the rip, you kind of have like the Zodiac vibes of just like all this inconsistent information coming in. As Ned said, the MO changing on the last crime, kind of like Zodiac. You know, he goes for the taxi ride with Stein, and he's actually in the victim's car, and that's like kind of way different than the first three.
And Jack the Ripper.
Yep, and then also as Ned mentioned, the changing of the caliber of the firearm. And then if that last one, Virgil's murder, is a 22 long, well, of course, I couldn't help but wonder, does Zodiac take that influence for his 22? Because if you include my non-canonicals, you have Ray Davis, the Domingus Edwards, and the Swindles all being killed with the 22, as well as Lake Herman Road. And then, as Ned said, you have this is probably nothing or it's synchronicity, but the similar names. You have Betty Jo, a Texarkana Phantom victim, Betty Lou Jensen as a Zodiac victim. So just very similar nicknames. That may be nothing but synchronicity, but it's just interesting how, like Ned said, you could keep looking and you'll keep finding stuff. It doesn't exactly make it anything, but you will keep finding stuff.
Oh yes, people have brought that to my attention too about the murders of Betty Jo Booker and Betty Lou Jensen. Now, what you're talking about with the instrument is, if people watch the movie The Town That Dreaded Sundown, it's somewhat of a dramatization of the events, the 1974 version, not the 2014 version.
Yep.
And in The Town That Dreaded Sundown, even though it's partially based on a horrible, horrible true story, there's still an excellent piece of horror cinema where the Phantom Killer murders a victim by tying a knife, which I believe is done with a piece of metal wire, to the end of a trombone, and even with the hooded mask on, blows into the trombone, and the knife stabs the victim. Now, there's one of the prime suspects in the Phantom Killer case is named Duty Tennyson. H.B. Tennyson went by the nickname Duty, and he was a trombone player. But with the instrument, I thought you were going to talk about the murder of Betty Jo Booker and her instrument. She played the saxophone, and she was
Yep.
actually at a concert and was being driven home. And her saxophone was taken and then thrown over the fence on the right side of the road. And this became a crucial piece of evidence, not to incriminate Duty Tennyson, but to incriminate a different Phantom Killer suspect named Yule Swinney, because Yule Swinney's wife, Peggy, would talk to the police officers, and she provided information that only the killer or the police should have known. That, yeah, he did it, I saw it, and, did he do anything? Go, yeah, he took something and he threw it over the fence on the right side of the road, and that's where the saxophone case was. So,
Yep.
there are all types of explanations as to how and why she could have learned that, but I'm really kind of um, 50-50 on Yul Swinney. I think that he's a reasonable suspect, but there are explanations. I mean,
Yeah.
his wife was interrogated multiple times, and to cite Jeremy Kennington and John Tennyson, they say that she was interrogated 4 times by 12 different police officers, and she also was talking to her attorney, who should have had the information, and that's how they believe that she um, learned it. And I just had to look up the name of the third male that was with Betty Jo Booker. I don't know why I blanked on it. His name was Paul Martin, of course, to say rest in peace to him as well. But he's the one that's driving Betty Jo Booker home. And as I understand, they weren't actually a romantic couple. You might read that they were on a date, but from what I've also read is that they were just friends, and it's more of an insinuation. Now, I want to come back to something that Ross said, and that is that on the night of the first Phantom Killer attack, we have Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae are attacked. And Ross can correct me if I misstate any of this. What I believe happened was that they're driving down the road, and for some reason, I mean, Jimmy Hollis is just kind of looking up at the night sky. He thinks the stars look nice, so he decides to pull over to the side of the road. It's not even a real lover's lane, and more importantly, it was not planned at all. He just wanted to pull over unexpectedly to look at the stars. So whoever attacked them was either waiting for someone, or as Ross said, could have just been having some type of schizophrenic episode, or they were specifically tracked and followed. If you get on the Phantom Killer Wikipedia page, you will even find info about how the authorities believed that both of the victims knew the killer, but they were covering for him. That's the explanation for the conflicting witness descriptions. Oh, he was African American, he was Caucasian, and the events that happened. Who would they be covering for? I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I'm glad Ned brought that up. So one thing, if you look up this case, you'll see that in that first, I guess, canonical, for lack of a better word, law enforcement pressed them super hard, specifically the female victim, and it was, oh, the reason your descriptions are inconsistent is because you guys know the assailant. They were pretty adamant for. I don't exactly know what the angle for this was, but the law enforcement was pretty adamant that they felt that they knew who the person was, and she was saying like, no, we don't, like like what, and like Ned just said, if they randomly went to that location, it's almost like the killer was either waiting there in lie for ambush, Zodiac style, or they'd had to be followed. You know what I mean? And that's there's a lot more seemingly inconsistency in this one than there is with the Zodiac, just because for the most part Zodiac is so random. But that's another parallel, right, Ned? I mean, Brian and Cecilia, they go to Lake Berryessa on a whim. They were planning to go to San Francisco. Blue Rock Springs is kind of random because they're picking up fireworks, so they're supposed to go buy a bag of weed. I mean, you'll hear a lot of random stuff like that. Going back to the Zodiac Blu-ray bonus features, Ned. So I'm sure you caught this. I just, on my rewatch, I found this super peculiar. Majot says that they were followed around all night long. He says the Zodiac was following them around all night long, from the burger shop to and again, this is way after the fact, guys. This is almost like 2007 or something. So this is 30, 40 years later when Majot is in much worse condition. I don't that comment. I mean, obviously, I don't believe it, Ned. But I was just like,
I don't believe it.
dude, you're bringing that up now. You know what I mean? Like your very good friend that you were supposedly in love with got shot, and you don't bring that up the night of the, or I guess you went to the hospital or whatever. Whenever you get out and they question you, you don't bring it up then. So that was weird. But I mean, as far as the victims not necessarily telling anyone where they're going or going somewhere random and then being attacked, it's I don't know if Zodiac looks to this one for influence, like Ned was saying, or that's right out of the Moonlight Murders playbook.
Well, as far as the influences on the Zodiac killer, I mean, targeting the people parked in cars in Lover's Lane style settings, that is where I think the biggest influence was.
Agreed.
And also just
wearing
that
the
wearing the
hood,
hooded costume.
canonicals. Yep.
Yes. And the deviation from the pattern after the fourth, after the third crime, on the fourth crime, deviating from the pattern. Now, I mentioned Jack the Ripper does that.
Changing
Jack the Ripper goes from attacking women outside to attacking Mary Kelly inside, but that's a small deviation. He's mostly still targeting lone females. He is only targeting lone females. All of Jack the Ripper's confirmed victims were females and no men. With the Phantom Killer and the Zodiac, both men and women are targeted. But Ross, I've encountered some rather saddening things as I go through the true crime stories on Blackbox Online Radio, and that is that these types of crimes happen super frequently, where there is a man and a woman parked in a car in a Lover's Lane style setting, and they're attacked and murdered. I mean, we've even talked once about like the Melina Rodriguez murders in 1967, right? And they're older victims than the Zodiac's victims. They're like in their mid-30s, but they're murdered in California. Then we have the Kalitsky-Bogle murders. What was that, in 56? When that was in Montana. The Forest Phantom, a murderer who operated in the Maryland area, also would attack people parked in cars in Lover's Lane settings. And I remember this story from America's Most Wanted, the show that introduced me to the Zodiac Killer. And it was just that there's this couple that is in a car together in a Lover's Lane style setting, and this man wearing a Halloween mask that looked somewhat like the Michael Myers Halloween mask. It might have been a little bit different or modified. He approached them with a garden tool of some kind, not even really an axe or anything, but some type of sharp garden tool that was similar, and just started beating them with it without any explanation. So when people are parked in cars in secluded areas, there are just countless examples of how these crimes are committed, and it's very, very saddening. It just shows this darker side of humanity that a lot of us didn't really know was there until we got under the surface.
I agree. Again, there's many more California beach knife crimes to add to that. Of course, there's like the known ones, Hood Garcia. Then down here in San Diego, Ned, we have the Torrey Pines one where they were attacked there. It's like a sleepover on the beach, and she was attacked in the sleeping bag with a knife and hit with a beach rock. There's a short film coming out that Nikki B from the Cooper Vortex is in on that, which should be interesting. But yeah, I recall something Morph said where he said like he tried to timeline out all of like the Lover's Lane's murders in the United States, and I think he didn't get very far because he came up with he said it was like practically thousands, you know what I mean? So it's just way more
I agree with that.
what
I think that it would be in the thousands. Yes,
actually knows, which is utterly astounding and insane, as Ned said, that this can be so frequently. So with Texas Phantom, I want to set up a little bit of the background of Texarkana. I'm from Boston, and I know Ned is an East Coaster. I'm out in SoCal now, but at the time, Texarkana was it was almost like the Wild West. We're talking mid 40s, post World War II, a lot of bar fights, a lot of very seedy town, a lot of like kind of nighttime crime, and that's kind of the backdrop for why the Phantom is able to operate in this kind of violent atmosphere. And then much worse so when the Moonlight murder crimes start, because guns are selling off the rack, people locking their doors, doing whatever security they can. So a lot of those types of products are just because the town is so paranoid, and because of that, it's causing fights. bar fights. It's people are calling up the cops and just, hey, this guy talked crap to me one time. They're just throwing them crappy suspects. Basically anyone who had a problem with anyone in town, right, is calling the police on the guy they had a problem with and saying, hey, I think this guy is the Phantom, and maybe really has like no backing for their argument other than like maybe they had an argument with that guy one time. Another thing that was going on was some of the vigilante groups. The teens were posting up at lovers lanes, like Ned was saying, and they were kind of trying to set up decoys to see if the Phantom would attack, and they were carrying firearms on them. And the police were doing that as well. I don't know if you heard about this, Ned, but there's like a couple incidents where teens almost actually got into shootouts with police because they were both trying to trap the Phantom, and a patrolman came up to one of the teens and was like, hey, what are you guys doing out here? And one of the kids almost drew on the cop, and it was almost an incident, but they were able to talk it down. So that's the kind of stuff that is going on around the Moonlight Murders. It's just a lot of craziness in town, just a lot of hysteria.
No, I didn't know about that, about that story with the teenagers. But
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
I'm not really, extremely surprised.
Yep.
And also, one thing that is a little bit more surprising is that the Phantom killer left behind an enormous amount of evidence.
Yep.
And I mean, the Zodiac killer really did not, though. One reason is because the Zodiac didn't commit things like sexual assaults. And also, as I understand, there's a palm print from the hand for the Phantom killer that was left behind somewhere. And I remember
Supposed to have
reading that.
fingerprints, I believe.
Yes, I mean, we might have the Zodiac's fingerprints. Maybe not. There's even less evidence. And the Zodiac was either very methodical. Well, he's a little bit methodical, a little bit lucky, and also the detectives just destroyed all the evidence, more or less.
Yeah, they both seemingly have similar stuff, although with the Phantom, sexually or whatever, attempting to sexually assault some of the victims, and then because the first one he assaults her with his pistol, right, and then
Yes.
she got away. The second one at Virgil's house, he leaves the red and black flashlight. I've always wondered why they couldn't fingerprint that, but I don't. Again, it was the 40s, so I don't know if a bunch of law enforcement officers, when they got on the scene, just picked it up with their bare hand, which I assume is what happened because it was around 46. I want to add some context to that last one when Virgil's shot in the chair and his wife goes to call for help on the phone. She also is shot through in the mouth, and the bullet ends up in her tongue. And when she runs away to her sister's house, her sister's not home, so she runs to a neighbor's from there. And like and she leaves like a trail of like blood out of her mouth and like broken teeth from the. If you just think about what a moment of insane panic that is, and for her to survive that, like it's quite a bit grislier than anything that happens in the in the Zodiac crimes. And then, as I mentioned, as Ned mentioned, as we both mentioned, him changing to it. Well, again, this brings up the whole thing of if this last one is even the Phantom or not. Ned already raised this question. It's a popular theory. But him changing to the 22 long rifle for Virgil, it's a bit like Zodiac changing to the 9mm at Blue Rock Springs and at Stein. So it's like, I don't know if Zodiac pulled that caliber change from the Moonlight. Like Ned said, it could either be subconscious or he could be like, oh, well, it worked for the Phantom, so maybe it'll work for. And again, I say that in jest, but obviously Zodiac and Texarkana are psychopaths. I don't need to explain that. So, what do you think?
Well,
Ned?
yes, though, but that really goes to show that the Zodiac was making very deliberate efforts to change the caliber of his firearm. The Phantom Killer was not quite doing that, and
Yep.
the Phantom Killer was way more aggressive, confrontational, brash,
Yeah.
way more physical with the victims. The Zodiac really doesn't
Hands-on.
want to touch the victims very much.
Yep.
But the Zodiac definitely wanted to change the firearm after every crime. And this would be a question that I would like to ask you, Ross, actually, and that is, what do you think the Zodiac did with the guns from his crimes? Do you think he destroyed them? Do you think he kept them? Do you think he dropped them on someone else so they would get caught?
It's an awesome question, Ed. I mean, for one thing, based off your last comment, I do think that Zodiac has a propensity for framing people. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Zodiac was a local, if he knew who Arthur Lee Allen was. And I'm not getting like murder, crew or team or group here. I'm just simply saying that if Zodiac's a local and ALA is a local, maybe Zodiac knew Arthur and Arthur didn't know who Zodiac was, but Zodiac knew him. Again, that's totally me, postulating on that, guys. Feel free to kill me in the comments if you don't like the theory. That's fine. As far as what he did with the guns, I actually have never really thought that much about it. If I'm going off Zodiac's personality and his letters, which, Ned and I both kind of agree is kind of a persona, but I do think regardless of how much of a persona it is, he does have that little bit buried inside his real personality. So if it's all the ego and all the bravado and the braggadocious he displayed in the letters, I don't see him getting rid of the guns, because he's, let's say he takes those trophies from Stein, right? He takes the wallet and the keys and the pieces of the shirt. In my opinion, he takes the trophies off the Swindles. We don't really know what he took from Ray Davis. Again, I'm saying my opinion, guys. It's cool if you only want to credit Zodiac with the Canonicals. That's fine. But for him to get away from, he says, the bomb in his basement is his death machine. So for him to get rid of his death machines, which is his firearms, the 22 and the 9mm, I don't know, maybe he would destroy, the Lake Berryessa hood, because that's your burning cloth. You burn that in a barrel, it's gone and you never see it again. Guns are much more difficult to destroy. I mean, yeah, you can bury them, you can throw them in the water. That's one thing that always surprised me about the Swindles, with it being Ocean Beach. You think the easy thing to do would just take the firearm and throw it into the water there, right? But they had, I think, 30, 40 Navy divers. There's absolutely no firearms in the ocean there, which, I know I'm bouncing around a lot here, but you guys have watched the show here, so you know how I do. If it is Zodiac in the pre-canonicals, he doesn't get rid of the firearm at OB, the Swindles, which is the easy thing to do, then I don't see him getting rid of the canonical firearms either. I think I don't know, does he have a Arthur Lee Allen style basement with all the 22s and pipe bombs in it and all that stuff? I don't know, because it's hard to say how much in the letters that he writes is actually the truth, right? My basement, I'm building bombs in my basement, my death machine, and I got flooded out and blah, 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 blah. I don't see him getting rid of the firearms, though. The 22 and the 9, at the very least, I would say he puts it in a place where only he knows. If it's a Don Cheney hiking camping type character, well, he can hike out there to a camping location that only he knows, bury it under a rock in a tree that only he knows, with maybe a marking that only he knows. You're talking about a guy capable of making these ciphers, so he could go out there, carve a little teeny symbol into a tree that means nothing to any of us, and that's a way that he can hide it so no one can find it. Now, if you're asking me if I buy the whole Case Breakers, Gary Francis Post, we know where all his guns are in a box up in the Sierra Nevadas, well, I find that very unlikely. I don't think, and again, that was how many years ago when they said that? So Zodiac's guns have just been sitting up there, and nobody has gone up to get them yet.
No, it has been a while since the Case Breakers came forward with that. Yeah. But I mean, as far as this thing about the Zodiac's persona, I said very clearly in this episode that I thought he was in character. I should add an additional point. I think at a certain time, the Zodiac began adding elements of his real personality into the letters.
Yep.
Maybe even after the Melvin Belli letter, from there and onward, when he starts saying stuff like, "This thing inside me won't stop me from killing."
Yep.
Or won't prevent me from, won't stop him from killing. Now, it's kind of hard how to interpret that. I mean, because Melvin Belli was an attorney, and that's something you might say to a lawyer, because people have talked about numerous reasons why he would do that. He wanted Melvin Belli to be his lawyer, perhaps. But also, the Zodiac is going to go on to say stuff like, "Well, I don't like to be ignored. I get so lonely when I'm ignored that I could kill somebody," something to that effect. Yep. Wear Zodiac buttons, but only the nice ones, not the nasty ones like Melvin's. Just that stuff I think was very real. When, he wants the attention, obviously that's true. But the fact that he's just asking for it so directly, and it sounds quite different than the tough guy who is bragging about the murders in July of 1969. So I think that he added on different elements of the persona. Some were true and some were false. And what he was actually thinking, though, it's so hard to unravel. It's like unraveling the thinking of a madman.
I agree 100%. And just real quick on the Texarkana Phantom and Moonlight Murders. So, four canonicals, like we said. The last one is highly questionable, which is not unlike Lake Herman Road in Zodiac, Ned. You know, a lot of people question that one, as you said, with the crime backdrop. And then seemingly another night and weekend killer. So, you know, it would seem that all three, Jack, Tex, and Zodiac, were night and weekend killers. That other last thing on Tex, and then we can answer a couple of these Zodiac questions. There's that guy who's run over by the train or supposedly killed and then run over by the train at the end, McFadden, which some people thought either could be the Phantom himself or was killed by the Phantom. That's also kind of similar with what we were saying about Jack and Zodiac, how there's these possible pre-crimes, pre-Jack crimes, pre-G crimes, pre-Z crimes, and then and the post-canonicals as well, which, you know, like we said in Zodiac, he pretty much claims every Northern California crime that happens after the Zodiac crimes, and a lot of it, especially with this Donna Lass thing. I know Ned has covered it in depthly. He was on that bonus episode of Zodiac speaking with Morph and Grinnell, which was excellent, about Donna Lass. Do you have any final take on the Donna Lass thing, Ned? Just because that's kind of like the recent Zodiac news, that they've had her skull for 20 years and they just now verified it. Does that give you any? Here's the direct question: does that give you anything that's like that could lean into Zodiac, or do you still think that is more of a seemingly random thing, and the you know, the peek through the pines card? That's not even fully authenticated card, is it?
No, I don't believe it's fully authenticated. And I think, though, that if anything, it shows that it could be possible that the Zodiac did indeed murder Donna Lass, because Richard Grinnell had his own explanations about how
Yeah.
and why he thought that the person who sent the peek through the pines card was actually pointing toward the location of where Donna Lass was murdered, not exactly showing a photo of the burial site or anything, but giving certain clues. That he had a very detailed piece of analysis on ZodiacCiphers.com. And was that the Zodiac? I mean, the Zodiac definitely seems to have mailed a lot of things around the time that Donna Lass went missing, going well into October with the Halloween card, one of his most famous ones, October 27th. Donna Lass went missing in September. Now, overall, though, it was actually 37 years when Donna Lass's remains were found, 1986 in Placer County, California. And, I mean, that's the stuff we were talking about on Zodiac Speaking. When I was there with Morph and Richard Grinnell, we're like, 37 years? I mean,
Yeah.
how on earth did it take that long? I mean, there are only so many missing people that went
Right.
off the grid in 1970. There's going to be a finite amount. Not like talking about everyone on the planet Earth, but like as a finite amount. And they never cross-tested the DNA of Donna Lass until 2023. And we're just like,
And she has living
what?
relatives, right, too? So it's not like some person that just, like, they didn't have any living relatives. Like, that would kind of be more
So
understandable. Not with this case.
absolutely, that was just genuinely shocking. But as I explore more true crime cases on Black Box Online Radio, one story that I did bring up on Zodiac Speaking was the lady in the fridge, and her name was Amanda Lynn Shumandiza, and it took well over 25 years for them to identify her remains. She was murdered in, was it 94, and the remains were discovered in 1995. Her body was placed into a refrigerator in a dump, which is like a trash site, and again, it can take decades for DNA to be connected to a victim, and it's not completely uncommon. 37 years is an enormous amount of time.
I agree.
And my final comment on that is, it's possible that there's a Zodiac connection. When I did my multi-part series on Donna Lass for Black Box Online Radio, I was mostly against the Zodiac connection. I'm just saying, this looks like an abduction, an opportunistic abduction from someone who had an infatuation with Donna Lass because of her appearance, and he most likely discarded of her remains near Lake Tahoe. Well, the Lake Tahoe thing is reasonably accurate in Placer County, California, where she's found. And do you remember the name of the exact gap where she is found? But
The
It's
Yuba?
the
Is it the Yuba
Yuba
Pass?
Gap, yes, the Yuba
Okay.
Gap. And we found there, I mean, that's somewhat close to Lake Tahoe. It's quite possible the person drove around the north edge of Lake Tahoe and dumped her remains in a secluded area. Did the Zodiac actually do that? I tend to think more and more that the Zodiac could have done, but absolutely, I would not endorse that completely. I just think it's more likely now than it was before.
Yeah, I agree. When you were doing your research, I was kind of in line with you, thinking like this one doesn't really feel like anything else. And as we said, Jack the Ripper goes off the rails. Texarkana supposedly switches it up in the last one, so it's not impossible for these changes to occur. But for the most part, you think there's some sort of general pattern that would be followed. And with that one, I didn't think so until Rich started putting his stuff together. And then every time he does something, he takes me for a ride in another
Yes,
another
same, the
direction.
same, same
um,
thing, yes.
Now, in that case, if Donna were to track out and look, we'll just say for sake of argument, look more like Zodiac activity, would that change your opinion at all on the Kathleen Johns thing, or do you still feel like that one is kind of like too much inconsistency in her story?
No, it would not change my take on the Kathleen Johns incident at all, because Kathleen Johns' story is very, very, well, we have lots of reasons to doubt it. And it's quite possible that she made the whole thing up, and that Howard Davis interviewed Kathleen Johns, and he talked about how we should just reject this entire notion that she made up the story about being abducted by the Zodiac killer and that she set her own car on fire for insurance fraud. That's impossible. She didn't even have insurance. She was too poor at the time. That's what Howard Davis has brought up.
Yeah.
But I was actually listening to the Zodcast, and Drew was talking about how it's kind of done in a different way, that she was trying to get sympathy from her boyfriend at the time, and it wasn't necessarily done for money. It was done more for, well, just that sympathy, maybe finances down the road in the long
Right.
term.
Well,
And
you
I
know
was,
where Drew got that. The officer in the Zodiac bonus footage says that. He says that he interviewed her too. I forget. I think it was I forget which guy it was, but he says the same thing. He interviewed her. She was with a boyfriend, and like that was kind of his take. That it was kind of too like you know didn't really have enough detail to it. It was kind of too vague. Like
I just think it's so bizarre that that if this were the Zodiac, that he would be driving around with her for multiple hours, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's over 2 hours in her estimation that she was in the car with the alleged Zodiac killer, and the Zodiac murdered people so quickly. I mean, even with Paul Stein, he rides in the car with Paul Stein. What is that, like 10 minutes or
yeah,
something? 15 maximum?
yeah,
I mean, not 2 hours.
yeah.
And numerous opportunities to drive Kathleen Johns to a secluded area and commit the murder. I mean, like, what was his whole plan? I mean, if that were indeed a confirmed crime, I just think that, as you said, too many inconsistencies. If it turns out that Donna Lass was actually a Zodiac victim, I would be forced to admit that I've been wrong about a lot of unconfirmed Zodiac things. But also, that doesn't mean that the Kathleen Johns incident was authentic. And no.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, man. No, good answer. And just final thought, and I will get to these questions, folks, about Tex. So, male female couples on lover lanes, like we said. Also, the car connection is very present for the most part, except for the last one in the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. And then, like I said, of course, you have like the stolen car element, which isn't really a thing in Zodiac unless you include Ray Davis, where the killer drives the taxi north. So, like I said, I just happened to wonder if that could be some sort of homage to the Phantom. Let's get these questions going. So, how was it determined that Zodiac actually wrote on the door after the attack on Berryessa? Thanks. So, Voodoo, we covered this. So, scroll back. It's apparently Sherwood Morrill, and we kind of raised what the issues with his
Well, I
opinion
mean,
are.
wait a second, Ross, though.
Good.
We can deal with this for a little bit. I
Yeah.
mean, the Zodiac is in the area. They also tracked the footprints going from like the tree line where Cecilia Shepard saw the Zodiac without the hood
Yep.
on to the blanket where Brian and Cecilia are. And that same set of footprints walks back to Brian Hartnell's
To the
car
car
door
door.
and they've examined all of this, and the footprints are very clearly documented. They've made all types of things that are done to examine them. Some of it's discussed in
Casts.
Graysmith's book. Well, yes, the cast, but also it's just like measuring other people's shoe sizes next to them. They have very, very clear samples of the killer's footprints and the walking path, which went back to the Carmen Dia. And if they have documented that stuff so well, I think it's perhaps safe to say that they can tell that he was kneeling, that the same tracks go to a kneeling place where he would have written on the car door. So it seems like it's the same killer. It's the same person.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Ben Ortega, do you think somebody will solve the Zodiac case ever? We'll toss it to Ned.
70% yes, 30% no. Think about everything that we have just said about Jack the Ripper and the Phantom Killer. Decades and decades. Jack the Ripper, centuries almost.
Yeah.
And the case has not been solved. And the Zodiac Killer did not leave a lot of evidence behind. The Phantom Killer left way more evidence. He hasn't been identified, and the story hasn't been solved. So 70% yes because of advancements in forensic technology, 30% no because a lot of the evidence was destroyed in the Zodiac case. Things were handled with bare hands. It was normal for people to do that. Ross was not making that up. It was normal for people just, kind of like examine a little bit. And I mean, they did that stuff in the Zodiac day and age. And we can even get into D.B. Cooper one day, Ross, and talk about how the evidence was also poorly handled in that case. And
Yeah. No, I mean, so forensic science, greatly advanced, guys. Like, I think one problem that people have, especially in Zodiac, but maybe even worse with the Phantom and the Ripper, Ned, is they look at all these, older cases with, like, today's, mind state of, well, you just take the DNA. Well, you just take the fingerprints. Well, you just take the forensics. And it's like, you guys got to keep in mind that, Zodiac, the bigger thing is, like, DNA. But even in Jack, it was only the last crime, the indoor one, that they actually took crime scene photographs were. And a lot of people brought up the fact that they didn't take crime. And that might have been, might have been some of the earliest, photography. I'm no photography history expert, but from a true crime perspective, it probably would have been pretty helpful to have crime scene photographs of those other four, and just didn't necessarily happen. Then, of course, as Ned mentioned, quite a bit of evidence in the Moonlight Murders and not much result. And then, of course, Zodiac, where maybe fingerprints, maybe not, maybe DNA from the stamp and a hair on the stamp, but this is 69 we're talking about, and as Ned said, we've never had an update from law. The last update we had from law enforcement, right, other than the Riverside thing, which I don't care to go into, was the FBI saying Iran Track and Blake and were correct on their solution, so that doesn't give you much in terms of forensics.
That was the last piece of strong, credible evidence and a strong, credible result. Now, Tom Boyd did come forward with the thing about how there was a DNA profile that was actually extracted from the Zodiac letters, but it was someone who couldn't have been the killer. Mm-hmm. And some people insist that means that it was referring to female DNA, but I didn't get that vibe. I mean, I simply just thought there was not enough info to determine, unless they know something that has not been shared publicly.
Yeah, and the rumor was female. I heard that as well. But then all it doesn't necessarily need to be female. It just needs to be, like, not the sex of what we think Zodiac is, not the ethnicity of what we think Zodiac is, animal DNA. I mean, there's quite a few, possibilities there, but it's a wishy-washy gray area, like we were saying. Another one for Ned. Does Ned have any further plans for the interviews with the expert series, or is it complete now? Would like to have seen Voight on there or Ranchak.
Well, yes, one thing we didn't talk about really during the introductions is I am also the host of the Zodiac Killer Channel's Interview with the Expert series. We released 2 episodes recently talking with Druser, also known as Andrew Gray, or I should say Andrew Gray, also known as Druser. And I was also a guest on the program as a bonus episode where Richard Grinnell volunteered to interview the host of the Interview with the Expert series. And I've loved working on that, and there are numerous episodes that you can find on the Zodiac Killer Channel. Please visit that one and subscribe to it as well. I am always ready for more, always down to do more interviews. Yes, we had reached out to Tom Boyd and Dave Warrenchak in the past, and they work on media projects, and they have some reasons why. And Dave has been very busy based on his last update, on his most recent Let's Crack the Zodiac episode. He's done numerous podcast interviews, and he gets contacted by countless people because they just think of him as the cipher guy, which he is. He is the Zodiac cipher expert, and he's a little bit hard to get in touch to. Dave Warnchak and I have had a couple interactions, and I would love to interview him. I would love to talk to him about the Zodiac ciphers and all of his observations. And he's also posted online about different aspects of the Zodiac case, what he thinks about different theories. I mean, do I have plans to continue that series? I mean, the Zodiac Killer channel is a little bit out of my control. I'm just the host of that program, not the owner of the channel, but I am always ready to go. I would love to work more on it.
Yeah, follow up to that. If Tom or Dave want to come over here, they're more than welcome to join the Zodiac Files interview series, and Ned is always welcome to join in on those interviews as well if they have any interest. I think that's basically it, Ned. I think we hammered what I wanted to cover. We got the Jack the Ripper parallels, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders parallels. Of course, one thing you guys could check out there is The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which Ned mentioned. That's the movie based on and I guess there's a couple crappy remakes, but I would say check the I think it's 76, Ned. Check that original, which is it's a horror movie, guys. It's I don't know. It's always tough watching horror movies that are based on like a real thing, Ned, because of course you're like, hey, this is a scary, entertaining movie, but these are also actual real victims of people that this happened to, even if it is as far back as the 40s, which that case is. But
yeah, I agree completely.
Check out that movie, guys. It's definitely an entertaining watch, and yeah, the Jack the Ripper thing is always interesting. Oh yeah, so I did want to get your take on Sweeney real quick before we go out. I think you said he's like a 50-50. He does make these comments when he's arrested, like, hey guys, like, throw the book at me. I know you're gonna get me for more than stealing cars, because him and his wife or fiance, whatever she was, I think Ned mentioned that, were going around stealing these cars, and that's how they found her. The officer parked at that car and waited, and then she came and got it and tried to drive it away, and that's how they arrested her. But like Ned said, there was seemingly a lot of gaps in their stories, and it didn't quite fit. So just like as a suspect, where were you at, Ned, or did you think maybe there was like any other stronger suspects for the Phantom?
When I first started looking at Phantom killer suspects, I of course encountered Yul Sweeney very early on. And I thought that there wasn't a whole lot there. There are these vague, ambiguous statements, as Ross said. They try to arrest him for stealing cars, and he says, I'm going to get the chair. And they're like, you don't get the chair for auto theft? And he's like, oh, you got a lot more on me than stealing cars. Stuff like that. I'm like, well, that doesn't mean that he was the Phantom killer. And then his wife starts going along with it. And I believe she was his newlywed wife. They were recently married, but he wasn't married. They weren't married for that long. And hey, Ross, did you encounter this? Is this true that he ended up spending 26 years in prison, though, for the auto theft? Because they thought, oh, well, there's a high chance that this guy is the Phantom killer. Let's genuinely throw the book at him, and he's a career criminal anyway.
Man, I didn't see what his sentencing was. I do recall it was something like that. I thought later on he gets out, right? He doesn't live like a kind of a long life, but I believe he's like in and out of jail for other stuff, unless I'm compounding that with some other suspect. Whoops.
I'm also going a little bit blank on that, but as a suspect, I mean, he is reasonable, like, because I mean, he's definitely a criminal that was in the area, and again, his wife did provide that information that should have only been known to the police. And I said there might be an alternative reason why. She's like, maybe marry this guy, turns out to be a dirtbag, and she wants out of the marriage. That could be one thing. But I read this once, and not on a scholarly thing, I think it's even on the Wikipedia, but it states that there was a heel print that didn't belong to the killer or the victim that could have matched one of Peggy Sweeney's shoes that says where she was standing, where she allegedly saw the crime. I don't know how likely that is. When I approach true crime cases and I encounter details like that, I begin to think, if that were an established fact, it wouldn't be so mysterious. You think it's maybe just a little bit more vague. But I mean, if she was actually a witness to one of the crimes, it's possible. It's not impossible. I mean, there's a chance that could have happened. But in the past, I thought that Duty Tennyson was much better suspect than Neil Swinney. And that was about
Right.
2019 when I first started reading about them. As I said, I mean, Duty Tennyson was a musician, trombone player in the band. Betty Lou Jensen, the musician, is murdered. And also, Duty Tennyson would go on to indirectly confess to being the Phantom Killer. He left behind a bunch of riddles and clues talking about how he he confesses to the crime in this type of suicide note confession, and then he leaves another note behind that says discard all previous notes, disregard all previous notes, and then he's kind of like retracting it. But I stepped back from him because I was just thinking, this guy is just playing games with people, even after death. He's
Yes, this
playing games with people.
I watched a video on that. So he's the younger dude that was he? I think he was in class or in band with the first female victim, but his friend said that like he was playing cards with him. I think on the night of that first canonical. So he's like, yeah, there's no way that guy could have been there. I was with him. So it's a
Quite
similar
possible. Yeah,
similar
but
type
he
of
was
thing.
very young at the time, like a late teenager. And
Yeah, committed
I
suicide.
mean, he commits suicide in 1948, 2 years after the Moonlight Murders end. And I again just think that he was somebody who was playing mind games with people. And
I agree. Yeah, I mean, the Sweeney and his wife thing. It's just like I don't love like those like accomplice theories like that because, as you mentioned in the first several canonicals, at least with surviving victims and what have you, it's just the Phantom by himself, and there's no really. If I could see if they said, hey, there's a nearby car with a silhouette of a person in it, that would be more convincing to like he had someone with him. But it's kind of like you said, he kind of just pops out of nowhere by himself. Almost what I would hearken to is the Seawater story about ALA coming back from Gaviota Beach covered in blood from killing Dominguez Edwards. It's just like never in a time out of any of these cases have we looked at has there ever been a time where somebody came back bloody to their accomplice to admit to them that the thing that so for it to happen in Zodiac or for it to happen in the Moonlight Murders just seems fantastic and outlandish, you know what I mean, because there's almost no case we can look to where that happened. So that it just, like you said, it seems too convenient of falling in line. Like, oh, it's because he brought his wife with him to all those Moonlight Murder Chronicles. It's like I don't know. I don't know if I see it, especially like that Virgil one because that was so chaotic. And the dude is trying to break through the door and shoot through the window and do all this crazy stuff. It's like you definitely don't picture someone going along with him to that home invasion. If that is the Phantom. Just raising that. So.
now, Ross, can I just ask you, though, what do you think the Sea Waters are all about telling those stories? Because if it were just one person saying, on June 4th of 1963, I was with Arthur Lee Allen, and he went to the beach and he came back with blood on him, you could always just play the card of, yeah, that person's crazy, they're out of their mind. But this is multiple people who are claiming they remember the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Dave and Connie both are saying they had this experience with Arthur Lee Allen in 1963 that on June 4th, he went to the beach and then he walked back up the hills with blood on his shirt, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What are they all about?
Yeah, you're asking me to delve into deep space here, but I don't know. It could be a situation where like this story has been repeated so much that when people are older in age, oh yeah, I remember that because it's just a story that's been told to you so many times that you don't specifically remember the event yourself. You remember these people telling it to you. I mean, dude, I've been down there. It's a super long walk down there, down and up. So the way that they were telling it felt too much of a like a ocean beach or a place where you can just step off to that bluff and then get on the main street and drive away. You can't do that at Gaviota. Now, granted, I don't know how easy to access it was back then, right? Because when I went, it was last year, and I had to park further down off the train tracks. That the parking, the turnoff where Dominguez's car was, that's not even there anymore. It's all filled in as a median now. So as far as like how it tracks with how the terrain looked back then to how it looked now, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't make it. Here's the thing. There's an article that they literally found the killer's blood on the rocks, and I'm pretty sure they saved those rocks in evidence. And I think it was like 80 feet up, so that's way far away from where the crime, not way far away, but far enough away for where the crime occurred. And didn't they save Alan's brain for testing? So like my question was, why can't they run that blood sample versus whatever they have left of Alan? And that should tell you right there if it's Arthur Lee Allen's DNA or blood sample, right? So that would kind of be my way of poking a hole through that one. But the thing is, they obviously knew the guy, right? Because they had the video footage and the pictures and the handwriting letters to
I don't
their
doubt
mom.
any of that. Yes.
Yeah, so I think that is relatively established. They probably were a family friend. I think, who knows? Even the personal stuff that they're saying of him assaulting the children, that's established because Arthur Lee Allen was arrested for that and went to Tascadero. So probably a good portion. Was that?
No reason to doubt that part.
Right. Sure. So I think probably a good portion of what they said tracks. It's just when they get into the Zodiac crimes, I feel like they're adding some extra dressing on there, and most of sort with the canonicals, because they tell the story of the dude like driving around like with a 40-ounce, drunk all the time with his pistol on him, shooting seagulls out of the air, and maybe even some of that is right on. But I just like, granted it was the mid to late 60s, so maybe law enforcement was a lot more lax. I mean, if Alan got pulled over one time nowadays after he had been drinking all day, you think he would get this DUI, and if he has a car full of guns or has guns on him that he's driving around shooting random animals, you would think that there would be a pattern of things like that happening, you know what I'm saying? So it's just a little too difficult. I mean, another big problem is Falk and Lindsay Robbins completely disregarded him as the person seen at Presidio Heights. So like for the Seawaters to just be like, not only is he definitely at Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and Presidio Heights, he's also at Oceanside, Gaviota Beach, and Ocean Beach, and then probably in their opinion, Riverside, which he may have well been down there at the race, but that doesn't put him at RCC killing Sherry. You see what I'm saying? So I feel like they just added a lot of extra sauce on to the Arthur Lee Allen story to put him at all of those places. Because now you don't got to just believe that he's at the 4 canonicals. Now you got to believe that maybe he's at the 4 pre-canonicals too. And there's just nothing like Santa Barbara. That's not that close to Vallejo at all. It's like 4 or 5 hours, 5-6 hours. So little bit of a stretch there. In my opinion. But how about you? Did you like anything that they said, or were you kind of just mixed bag?
Well, as I said, I don't doubt any of the stories of abuse. I have no reason to doubt someone coming forward with that, partnered with Arthur Lee Allen's known history of it.
Yep.
The thing that I am most on the fence on is that 1 month prior to Allen's death, he made an alleged deathbed confession to one of the Seawaters. I believe it's to Dave Seawater. And that it was via phone call. And people often use the term deathbed for it, but someone clarified, and it wasn't even one of the Seawaters in the comment section, they're just clarifying that was an expression. Arthur Lee Allen wasn't actually bedridden at the time, but 1 month before he died, he made this call saying that he was the Zodiac, and he confessed to it. I think if anything in a story is credible, it is that. Did that actually happen? I'm so on the fence about it. Yeah. I do not believe any of these things about witnessing the crimes.
Right.
And that's then where I said the problem is. I believe parts of the story. I don't believe parts of the story. One seems like it could be true. Would Arthur Lee Allen confess to being the Zodiac a month before he died, no matter what he did? Yeah. Yeah, he would. He was a jerk.
Yeah.
Lots of people made statements like that. You even have Rick Marshall saying, well, I hope the Zodiac doesn't look like me. If he does, that's not good because he fits me to an absolute T. That's not confessing, but he's leading people on. People do this stuff all the time. And not only with the Zodiac, with D.B. Cooper and with the Phantom Killer even. There's a scene in The Town That Dreaded Sundown where they're like, this man confessing to the murder. He says he threw the gun in the river, and he can show you the place where he did it. Something to that effect. And I think that was meant to highlight that sometimes there are bogus confessions.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And another thing, if he's going to make that call with the deathbed confession call, when Alan does the interview with the news, local news or whatever that was, the TV news in his basement, he's super adamant that he's like not the Zodiac, and he's almost crying. So I mean, I know Graysmith says that that's fake, but why is he going to be so adamant that he's not Zodiac on TV and then go call a family friend or a personal friend and admit to it? You know, it doesn't seem to track. Real quick, too, deconstructing the Gaviota Beach Dominguez Edwards argument. He takes us on beach trips all the time, and then he parks the car and, hey, wait here for me, to a car full of kids, while he takes the rifle and goes down to commit the double murder, comes back covered in blood. Whose blood is he covered in? Because forensically from the crime scene at Gaviota Beach, they're shot from pretty far away, 15, 20 feet. I don't know if that's far enough for the victim's blood to splatter on the assailant. Then he gets into a scuffle with Dominguez. Dominguez has the bruises on his knuckles, cracks his face, cracks his nose. They said he comes back covered in blood, but was that his blood or the victim's blood? You said specifically if they said specifically he came back injured with bruised face and a bloody nose, you know, it could have tracked with what we have in the articles and the forensics and the evidence in the actual story. But because of the fact that they made it sound like it was this Jack the Ripper bloodbath where he just like blew them away with the automatic rifle and the blood just splattered all over him like a movie, and that's not what the crime scene shows from the groupings of the projectiles of the shells on the ground and the, you know, just all of the rest of the evidence at the crime scene. You know what I mean? So it's like, it sounds like they could have just did some simple research on that one and looked up the articles and see that the assailant was actually injured at the Gaviota, or most likely injured at Gaviota Beach, you know, and their story, from what I heard, didn't really account for that. I think that's pretty much all we got for our boy Ned Dehan. Blackbox Radio, make sure you subscribe to Blackbox Online. If you want to just hit him with your links and where to find you one more time, Ned, make sure you guys go donate to this guy's Buy Me a Coffee and check out is the book still on Amazon, Ned, or do you just have the audios on your channel now?
Oh, no, I'm not promoting any books on Amazon.com right now, but
Sure.
I do promote the audiobooks on YouTube. Again, you can listen to those for free. They are now YouTube exclusive. But yes, Ross, thank you for having me. My name is Ned Dehan. I'm the host of Blackbox Online Radio, and I also have some other things on YouTube, such as AstroPsych 400, and some more channels are in the works, and it's all going to be part of a future company called Switchforce Media is going to be exploring a lot of things on YouTube and beyond. And as I said, I release reels on Facebook and Instagram, Ned Dehan on Facebook, BlackboxNed88 on Instagram. But really, I mostly invite you to check out Blackbox Online Radio on YouTube, where you can get countless true crime videos talking about the stories that Ross and I have just been through. And Ross did mention the buymeacoffee.com page, and that is BlackboxNed88 as well. That's my name over on buymeacoffee.com. But I'm really just saying, if you're curious about some of the stories we've talked about, feel free to come over to BBO War and subscribe to the channel. And I do a weekly segment about the Zodiac Killer, a weekly segment about Jack the Ripper, and a weekly segment about D.B. Cooper, and loads of bonus episodes on any subject under the sun or in the darkness. And Ross, thanks again.
Awesome, man. Glad to have you back. Great show. This is a topic I really wanted to cover. Again, like I said, I mostly found out about Moonlight Murders from Ned's channel, and I was pretty interested in the whole lover lane, secluded lovers lane thing, all the other correlations that we talked about, as well as the hooded mask, which I think seems like it was definitely an influence to the Zodiac, although there's many others. I think that's all we got for this show, guys. I'll do a little outro. Ned, if you want to stick around, I'll give you a shout out in a couple minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, bro. All right, Ned Dehan, make sure you subscribe to his channel, Blackbox Online Radio. Follow him on Instagram, Facebook. Here's a quick shout out for Ned. Great to catch you on here, Jeff and Melissa. We are going to be... we actually didn't do much Cooper this time, Josh, but if you check out my interview on Ned's channel, he asked me about Cooper and Zodiac in that one. Voodoo Baby, thanks, Ned, for the explanation. Yeah, I think Ned covered that with the footprints. That was cool. Zodiac Files Episode 4 coming soon. The Gaviota Beach Murders coming very, very soon. We're working nonstop editing to get that one out ASAP. Like, sub, share. You can join the memberships in the membership button below. Click join. And that's basically all. We have part 2 of the show with Redeli and Holly Toshke coming up soon. And then my friend Gaz and I are about to do the Crow 1994 review at 2 p.m. That's about an hour and a half. So double event today, double feature, Jack the Ripper style. I think that's basically it for me, guys. The reviews will keep rolling in. Make sure to like, sub, share. Zodiac Files episode coming soon, and the interviews will keep rolling in. But we got a lot more stuff. The schedule is going to pick up throughout the summer into the fall, guys. So yeah, good stuff. That's it for this show. Make sure to like, sub, share, unless you guys have any parting comments for me. Best place to find Ned, his channel, Blackbox Online Radio. Find him on Instagram, Facebook, and make sure to donate to that buy Ned a coffee, Blackbox 88, I think he said it was. But that's it. Leave any comments below on the Zodiac Crimes or the Texarkana Moonlight Murders or Jack the Ripper influence on the Zodiac Crimes below. Just trying to make sure I covered everything. Make sure to get the comic, The Dark Rift, Volume 1, Escape from Earth. And that should be it for me, folks. Of course, you can follow on X, Instagram, and the blog. Oh, yeah, the Patreon. Make sure you check out the Patreon below, too. That's the 2 places you can support. Click join the membership and click and join the Patreon. Also, I just posted the Run for the Sun. That's the 3rd in my series of the Most Dangerous Game adaptations. It's on Patreon and the YouTube community tab. The next one up will be Bloodlust, which Ned has posted about on his channel before. In addition to Shock Corridor, check that out. Those are all the ones that are possible Zodiac influences. I'm out, guys. YouTube.com/PlanetXFilm, the Zodiac Files series, #1 show on YouTube. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Appreciate you guys. Like, sub, share.